Chapter 1 begins with the introduction of dragons. Dragons have become an important part of daily life. Ever since humans succeeded in breeding them 100 years ago, they have been used in many situations. Based on their sizes and purposes, they are classified as small dragons, medium dragons, or large dragons. Though small dragons are considered small, they are still dragons. They are generally 2 or 3 times the size of humans and are used to transport goods and people. Dragons also play a role in war as elite cavalry. Medium dragons are as large as a house and serve an important role in transportation. Large dragons form the core of an army, and each usually possesses its own title. Those who command dragons are known as dragon knights, and the places where dragon knights gather are dragon knight guilds. Cyril LaRose stood watching as a large winged dragon flew past nearby and identified it as a Vritra. Besides being capable of flight, Vritras were highly loyal, possessed great stamina, and were used to carry goods across long distances. Nidhogg's were also medium-sized dragons and equally loyal, but because of their aggressive nature, they were used to transport troops, making them highly valuable to the army. Nearby, a child excitedly pointed at the dragon before expressing admiration for it and resolving to become a dragon knight in the future. Cyril smiled. Dragon knights had always been the most popular profession, not only because riding a dragon looked impressive, but also because it was the highest-paying job. Cyril continued walking through town when someone suddenly called out for attention. People moved along the busy street as a man urged the dragon ahead not to stop and to keep moving while the creature let out a low growl. Cyril observed that it was a Tarask, one of the small-sized dragons commonly used for transportation. It belonged to a transport business that carried passengers for a fee. Because Tarasks were small and moved in a way that prevented jolting during travel, riding them was comfortable. The dragon continued growling and behaving uneasily as its handler touched its head, puzzled by its sudden behavior. Cyril stepped forward and approached the handler, who reacted in surprise before greeting him and apologizing, explaining that a small problem had arisen. Cyril clarified that he was not a customer and pointed out that the dragon had an injury on its right hind leg. The handler was surprised and had the dragon walk a few steps to confirm it. After watching it walk, he confirmed the injury and wondered when it had happened. Running a hand through his hair in frustration, he lamented that the situation was bad for business. Cyril remained quietly observing everything that unfolded. The handler thanked Cyril and wondered if he operated the same kind of business, but Cyril indicated that he did not. Instead, he emphasized that the most important thing was to take good care of the dragon, and the handler acknowledged his advice. Cyril then walked closer to the dragon. Unexpectedly, the dragon thanked him. Cyril smiled at it, assured it that it was no problem, and wished it to take care. A memory surfaced from the time Cyril had first told a handler that a dragon was depressed and should be allowed to take a day off. The handler had laughed, admitting he had been curious about what Cyril was going to say and remarking that he had never heard of a dragon becoming depressed. Cyril had insisted it was true in an effort to defend the dragon. The handler merely observed that it was strange for Cyril to sympathize with what he considered a tool. Cyril clicked his tongue in frustration before revealing that, ever since childhood, he had been able to understand the language of dragons. Although he could not understand the speech of any other animals, he could somehow understand dragons. Because of that ability, he became a dragon knight. Normally, people tame dragons by teaching them signs to issue command. For Cyril, however, the process was different. He communicated directly with dragons and asked them for favors. He was better than most at telling dragons how to perform their work. Because of that ability, he had been recruited by the largest dragon knight guild, Lindworm. Lindworm was an S-rank guild. Guilds were ranked according to the number of dragons they owned and their achievements, with S being the highest rank. To become an S-rank guild, a guild had to complete 3 consecutive top-rank quests if it cooperated with others. Without cooperation, it had to complete 2 consecutive top-rank quests on its own. Lindworm possessed the ability to accomplish such challenges. It was also a guild that controlled and enslaved dragons, a practice Cyril found deeply uncomfortable. It had not even been a month since Cyril had joined. Even so, he had already been branded as useless and as someone who rebelled over pointless matters before being thrown out of the guild. For Cyril, however, being expelled was exactly what he had wanted. Although he accepted it, he still needed work. Having been fired from the guild, he decided to work as a freelance dragon knight. He headed toward the public office building, where independent dragon knight requests could be found. Standing before the request board inside the public office, he considered the available jobs. Although other agencies offered similar work, he knew he had no reputation with them. As someone who did not own a dragon and had just been fired, finding work through those agencies was impossible. The requests posted at the public office, however, were open to everyone, and most could be completed using rental dragons. After looking through the postings, Cyril selected one. The request was for taming a newborn dragon. A short while later, Cyril met a man who introduced himself as Patrick Forget. Cyril introduced himself in return, and Patrick thanked him for accepting the request. Patrick explained that very few people were willing to take on such work. Cyril noted that the task differed from ordinary dragon training and control, and Patrick acknowledged that the explanation made sense. Cyril then asked how Patrick wanted the dragon to be tamed. Patrick explained that the dragon was a gift for his son. Cyril understood. Because of that, Patrick had decided to seek the help of a dragon knight. Without further delay, Cyril asked to see the dragon, and Patrick agreed before leading the way. Soon afterward, Cyril found a Tarrasque lying on the ground in chains. Patrick explained that he had chosen that species because it would not grow too large and would adapt more easily to everyday life. Cyril agreed and added that it could also serve as a transport dragon. Patrick explained that it refused to obey the tamers and asked whether Cyril could do something about it. Cyril said he would try before walking over and kneeling beside the dragon. He gently introduced himself and asked for the dragon's name. The dragon reacted in distress, repeatedly calling for its sister. Cyril tried to calm it before asking what had happened and whether it was willing to tell him. The dragon reacted with surprise and asked if Cyril could understand its words. Cyril confirmed that he could. The dragon responded in disbelief before pleading for him to listen. Cyril quietly listened as the dragon explained that it had always lived together with its sister, but only it had been bought and brought there alone. It begged Cyril to let it remain with its sister and promised to obey anything he asked if he could make that happen. Cyril asked whether it missed its sister that much, and the dragon explained that they had supported each other ever since they were inside their eggs before trailing off without finishing. Cyril pointed toward the merchant standing nearby and asked the dragon whether it was willing to take care of the merchant's son and listen to everything he said. The dragon readily agreed, saying that as long as it could live with its sister, anything was acceptable. Cyril understood and walked over to the merchant. The merchant asked how things were going and whether Cyril had succeeded. Cyril replied that everything was going well. When the merchant asked what he meant, Cyril asked where the dragon had been purchased. The merchant answered that it had come from a dragon merchant. Upon hearing that, Cyril urged him to hurry so they could check whether the dragon from the same batch was still available. He explained that it was the dragon's sister and that the dragon had promised to obey anything as long as it could stay with her. He added that this was what the dragon had told him. Although the merchant remained confused, Cyril insisted that he do as instructed. Later, the dragon moved across the open ground. When the second dragon arrived, the first called out to its sister. The two dragons ran toward each other, and Cyril asked everyone to give them some space. One of the people present directed the others to stay back, and another agreed in confusion. The dragons rushed together and began calling to one another. They expressed relief, confirmed that they were both safe, and embraced. One cried while saying it had thought it would never see its sister again. They continued calling to each other as they held one another. Cyril watched them with delight. The merchant remarked that the sight was surprising. Cyril explained that it was simply because they were sisters and observed that they were just like humans. He recalled his experiences in the guild once again. After witnessing the Tarrasque sisters' reunion, he understood that it was better to let them remain together, even without understanding what they were saying. Patrick then told Cyril that he would go get the payment, and Cyril agreed. The dragons approached Cyril and thanked him for bringing them back together. The other dragon asked whether he was the person who had helped them before thanking him as well. Both dragons promised to obey anything Cyril asked of them. Cyril smiled and asked them to get along well with the child. They agreed, saying that as long as they could stay together, they would. Cyril wished them good luck, and the dragons thanked him once more. After a while, Patrick expressed his deep gratitude and sighed with relief. He remarked that it was astonishing how obedient the dragon had become, explaining that he had consulted several tamers and had been close to giving up before concluding that Cyril was truly skilled at this work. Cyril accepted the thanks and reminded Patrick that the most important thing was never to separate the two dragons, not only now but even after they had grown. Otherwise, their larger bodies could cause trouble if they were separated. Patrick promised to remember the advice. With that, Cyril left the house. Looking back, he saw the two dragons resting peacefully side by side on the ground. He smiled. Although he had been expelled from the greatest guild, he had no regrets. He understood the feelings of dragons because he understood their language, and he resolved to continue working according to his principle of putting dragons first. A short time later, Cyril stood before the request board at the public office once again. He knew it was important to keep working to make a living, and equally important to build a reputation that would benefit him in the future. Nearby, several people examining the board noticed a request with exceptionally high pay. After reading further and realizing that dragon rental expenses had to be covered personally, they concluded that the job was not for them and walked away. Cyril then examined another notice, and after seeing the client's name, decided to take that request. Meanwhile, a maid entered a room and was surprised to find the lady still writing after having already completed a large number of letters. The lady found the situation frustrating because things were not progressing well, though she regarded letter writing as part of how she maintained social connections. Even after writing so many letters, It would still take a long time for dragon knights to deliver them, and she feared the worst-case scenario in which all of her efforts would be wasted. After letting out a soft sigh, she wondered whether there was any reliable dragon knight available. Chapter 2 begins with Cyril walking toward a large residence. It was time to meet the client in person, and he wondered who she might be. As he looked at the mansion, he noted to himself that, although he had expected it, it was still a magnificent residence. He also considered that, despite being only a letter delivery request, the job paid very well while not covering dragon-related expenses, making it unprofitable for an independent dragon knight who did not own a dragon. After entering the building, Cyril found a woman waiting for him. She introduced herself as Catherine Morinier. Cyril greeted her and remarked that it was a pleasure to meet her. As he was about to introduce himself, Catherine interrupted him. Observing that he looked very young, she questioned whether he was capable of handling the task and asked if he could manage a dragon. Cyril confirmed that he could. She then asked how well, and he answered that he was capable enough. Cyril quietly observed that her personality suited her appearance perfectly. After a brief silence, Catherine relented and explained that he was not the only person she had hired. Cyril asked whether the letter was important, and Catherine confirmed that it was. Holding a cup in her hand, she explained that she had prepared numerous copies because she believed a single letter might not reach its destination in time. The Morinier clan was a count family that ruled the territory and possessed wealth far exceeding that of his previous client, Patrick. Cyril then said that he had a question, surprising Catherine. He asked what kind of letter it was. Catherine looked puzzled and wondered whether he was trying to pry into her affairs. Cyril denied it and explained that knowing the nature of the letter would make his job easier. If it were an urgent message, he could prioritize speed, and if it contained confidential information, he could ensure that it did not fall into the wrong hands. Catherine listened carefully to his reasoning. After thinking for a moment, she decided to tell him. The letter was a love letter, written in reply to one she had received from Baron Bouquet. Cyril fell silent for a moment before concluding that she was in a relationship with a baron. Catherine remarked that maintaining relationships with other clans was troublesome. She started to say something further about the man but decided not to continue. She then informed Cyril that the destination was Ribot and asked how many days the delivery would take. Cyril considered the distance from Bois Roussel town to Ribot before stating that he would deliver it within the day. Catherine reacted with surprise, noting that the other people she had hired had all requested 3 days. She remarked that it did not matter as long as the letter was delivered and entrusted the task to him. Catherine handed the letter to Cyril and reminded him to bring back proof of receipt in exchange for his payment. Cyril acknowledged that he understood. Later, Cyril left the mansion and considered that, before anything else, he needed to borrow a dragon since he did not own one himself. He also realized that the request was far more prestigious than he had expected. Not only could he become acquainted with the Morinier clan, but he might also establish a connection with the Baron family. Determined to make the most of the opportunity, he resolved to give the job his best effort. He then entered a building, where a man welcomed him and asked what kind of dragon he was looking for. Cyril asked whether there were any wyverns, explaining that he needed a fast one because he was not carrying any luggage. The man replied that they had 3 and invited him to follow. They walked out into the yard, where the man pointed out the 3 wyverns and told Cyril to choose whichever he preferred. Cyril thanked him. Every dragon knight had a different way of communicating with dragons, and many kept their methods secret. As the owner of a dragon rental shop, the man was probably already accustomed to such things, Cyril concluded. As Cyril approached the wyverns, they repeatedly remarked that he was coming. They noted that he was a human and commented that he looked more foolish than their previous customer. Cyril smirked and remarked that the comment was rather harsh before asking what they meant. One of the wyverns laughed, insisting that it was simply telling the truth, but then stopped upon realizing that Cyril had understood its words. Cyril casually confirmed that he had. The wyverns were astonished, noting that such a thing was rare. One wondered how it was possible and asked whether Cyril had been raised by dragons. Cyril denied it. The wyvern became confused before concluding that he was strange and asked why he had come. Cyril explained that he needed a partner for a job and had to deliver a letter as quickly as possible. He then asked which of them was the fastest. One wyvern proudly claimed to be the quickest but first asked what kind of letter it was. Upon learning that it was a love letter, the wyvern eagerly demanded more details, asking who had sent it, who would receive it, and whether the sender was male or female. Cyril calmly explained that it was from a woman to a man. The wyvern became even more enthusiastic and begged to be chosen for the job. Surprised, Cyril watched as it repeatedly requested to hold the letter. When he wondered why, he overheard the other wyverns talking among themselves. One dismissed it as the same lecher as always, while another questioned what was so appealing about a human woman. Another wyvern then called Cyril's attention to the one standing on the right, explaining that it was actually the fastest. Cyril turned to that wyvern and confirmed whether it truly was the quickest, and it affirmed that it was. Cyril then informed the shopkeeper that he would take the wyvern on the right. The shopkeeper asked whether he was certain, pointing out that the one in the middle was considered the fastest. Cyril repeated that the one on the right would be fine. The shopkeeper accepted the decision and remarked that it was an unusual choice. Shortly afterward, Cyril departed with the wyvern. Throughout the journey, the wyvern repeatedly insisted that Cyril hand over the letter. Eventually, Cyril agreed, prompting the wyvern to cheer as it delighted in the scent of a beautiful lady. Cyril quietly wondered whether this was really acceptable. The wyvern excitedly continued declaring that it was a lady's handwriting. Before long, Cyril rode high above the town. He inwardly observed that the lecherous dragon was truly incredible. Although wyverns were small dragons, they possessed the ability to fly. Cyril had chosen it because flying allowed them to reach Ribot by the shortest possible route, ensuring the letter would be delivered as promised. Thanks to the wyvern's tremendous speed, they arrived in only half a day. When the Baron learned that Catherine's reply had arrived, he laughed with delight. After thanking Cyril, he quickly turned away and indicated that he did not wish to be disturbed. Cyril regarded him as quite a strange person and thought that dealing with him must have been difficult for Lady Catherine. Cyril was then entrusted with delivering the Baron's reply back to Lady Catherine. After handing the letter to the lecherous wyvern, the return journey took only half a day. Cyril noted that the quest had been completed in only half the time he had originally promised Lady Catherine. When Catherine saw him return, she remarked that it was remarkable. Not even a full day had passed, yet Cyril was already back. She praised his capability. Cyril accepted the compliment with gratitude. Catherine then asked for his name. After Cyril introduced himself, she said that she would remember him and would call on him again whenever she needed something in the future. Cyril considered the job a great success. Afterward, he headed to the dragon market. He had only come to look at the dragons that day, knowing they were far beyond what he could currently afford. Dragon rental fees were expensive, and more importantly, owning a dependable dragon would make it much easier to take on more difficult jobs. As he wondered whether there were any good dragons available, he suddenly noticed one lying on the ground. It was a velour, yet it was being sold at an unusually low price. Cyril wondered why. Chapter 3 begins with Cyril arriving at the dragon market, where he became skeptical after noticing a dragon being sold at an unusually low price. A shopkeeper greeted him, and Cyril mentioned the velour advertised on the poster outside, asking why it was so inexpensive. The dragon cost roughly the same as the savings he had accumulated during his time in the guild, and the tattered poster made him feel somewhat sympathetic. The shopkeeper hesitated before answering. Cyril asked whether there was something wrong with the dragon. The shopkeeper assured him that there was not, explaining that the dragon was physically healthy and outstanding even by velour standards. Cyril then questioned why it was being sold so cheaply. After a brief pause, the shopkeeper bluntly explained that the dragon was lazy. Cyril was puzzled as the shopkeeper elaborated that the contrast between the dragon's excellent abilities and its refusal to follow commands was too great. He admitted that he would not recommend buying it. Even so, Cyril asked whether he could see the dragon, and the shopkeeper readily agreed. A few minutes later, Cyril found the velour sleeping on the ground while the shopkeeper told him to take his time. Velours were commonly used for transportation. Although they were not especially fast, they possessed broad backs and remarkable stamina. Being herbivores, they required little preparation for long journeys, as grasslands and rivers provided everything they needed. Cyril approached the resting dragon and apologized for interrupting its sleep. He explained that he had heard about its situation and asked whether there was a reason it lacked motivation. The dragon opened its eyes and remarked that there was no point explaining anything to a human like Cyril. Cyril observed that it had quite a cool personality and asked whether it truly could not speak with him instead of ignoring him. The dragon immediately sat up in surprise and questioned whether Cyril could understand its word. Cyril confirmed that he could. The dragon wondered how a human possessed such an ability. Cyril remarked that it was a useful talent and suggested that it might even help in this situation. He asked whether he was right, causing the dragon to fall silent. After a pause, the dragon admitted that it simply wanted to sleep. Cyril was confused, and the dragon explained that it needed 12 hours of sleep every day because otherwise it would have no energy. Cyril found that rather unusual. Most dragons managed with as little as 2 hours of sleep each day, and some could even continue moving while asleep. He watched as the dragon began dozing off again and chuckled, recalling the saying that every dragon was different. Cyril then asked whether the dragon would be willing to work for him if he allowed it to sleep for 12 hours every day. The dragon accused him of lying, but Cyril immediately denied it. He pointed out that, if he had no intention of keeping such a promise, he could simply choose another dragon instead. The dragon stared at him for a while before asking whether it could truly sleep that much. Cyril confirmed that it could, on the condition that it worked properly after getting enough rest. The dragon fell silent before agreeing to trust him. The shopkeeper asked whether Cyril was truly certain about the purchase and reminded him that it was non-refundable if any problems arose. Cyril replied that it was no problem because he had confidence in his abilities as a dragon knight. After paying, he left the market together with the dragon. As they walked, Cyril asked whether it would mind receiving a name, explaining that having one would make things easier. The dragon replied that it did not mind, though humans usually referred to dragons by numbers. Cyril answered that, since he could understand their language, he had no intention of calling them by numbers. The dragon accepted that, and Cyril named it Louise, asking how the name sounded. Louise repeated it, prompting Cyril to wonder whether it disliked the name. Louise denied that and explained that it simply felt strange to be given a name. Even so, it admitted that the name was acceptable. Cyril was relieved to hear that. As they continued walking, they eventually arrived at Cyril's house. Louise asked where it should sleep. Cyril replied that there was a garden behind the house, though it was free to sleep anywhere there. When they looked, the garden was completely empty. Cyril apologized, explaining that he had rented the house because of its large garden, believing it would be ideal for living with a dragon, but in reality it was simply a large, empty space. Louise replied that anywhere would be fine as long as it could sleep. Cyril remarked that Louise truly loved sleeping before asking whether she wanted to sleep right away. He added that it was already late and that they had no work scheduled for the rest of the day. Louise looked at him and called out to him. When Cyril asked what was wrong, Louise questioned whether this arrangement was really acceptable. Cyril confirmed that it was, explaining that he had already agreed to it and had no problem with it. Louise commented that he was a strange human, and Cyril noted that he had heard that many times before. As they resumed walking, Louise addressed him as her big boss. Cyril looked confused before realizing that she meant master. Louise then said that she wanted to show something only to him. Cyril asked what it was, and Louise explained that it was her secret. She opened her mouth wide and let out a powerful roar. To Cyril's shock, spears of light formed before a tremendous burst of power surged outward. Startled, Cyril stumbled back slightly and wondered how Louise had produced such an ability. Louise admitted that she did not know and had simply discovered it by chance. Cyril remarked that he had encountered around 100 Balor dragons, yet this was the first one he had ever seen capable of such a feat. He was certain that this was not an ability characteristic of the Balor species. Louise then explained that every time she used the power, she became extremely sleepy afterward. Cyril admitted that he did not know why she possessed such an ability, but such overwhelming power would undoubtedly consume a tremendous amount of energy. Louise acknowledged that this was probably true but declared that she would use the ability whenever Cyril ordered her to. Cyril told her that she did not need to push herself so hard and thanked her. The following day, Cyril greeted Louise with a good morning and told her that he was going job hunting. He asked what she intended to do, and Louise simply indicated that she was going back to sleep. Cyril accepted her answer and told her that there might be work in the afternoon, but until then she was free to sleep as much as she wanted. Louise merely responded with a quiet sound. As he left, Cyril reflected that he would continue allowing Louise to sleep as much as she wished, confident that she would eventually come to understand his intentions. Cyril headed to the public office and examined the request board. Now that he had Louise, he hoped to take on transportation-related jobs. Suddenly, a woman called out to him. Turning around, Cyril recognized her as Rose but still confirmed her identity. Rose affirmed that he was correct and explained that she had been waiting for him. Confused, Cyril listened as Rose informed him that a request had been specifically entrusted to him and invited him to discuss it. Inside a room, Cyril sat down with Rose and asked why the request had been assigned to him. Rose explained that Catherine had spoken very highly of him. Cyril was surprised. Rose continued by saying that very few independent dragon knights had ever earned praise from the young lady. Cyril realized that all of his hard work had paid off. Rose then explained that the job had been entrusted to him because of the reputation and credibility he had established. Cyril asked what kind of work it involved. Rose answered that it was a tracking mission. Confused, Cyril remarked that it did not sound like a task suited for a dragon knight. Rose agreed, explaining that it was no ordinary tracking assignment. She revealed that it was a top-secret mission before informing Cyril that the princess was currently missing. Chapter 4 continued with Cyril asking Rose what she meant by the princess. Rose replied that she could not elaborate and offered her apologies. Cyril concluded that this meant the person in question truly was the princess of this country. He then asked if she could at least tell him the details. Rose agreed and asked whether he knew about Mount Himalaya. Cyril recognized it as the mountain to the north before realizing it was also the mission site. Rose explained that the princess's procession had apparently gone missing on that mountain. Hearing this, Cyril confirmed that it had not been very long since they disappeared. Rose confirmed that it had happened just the previous night. She explained that what had occurred was still unknown, so the client did not want to cause an uproar over the matter. The client's foremost request was to determine what had happened. She then asked whether Cyril would accept the mission. After remaining silent for a moment, Cyril understood the situation and accepted responsibility for it. Not long afterward, Cyril and Louise began their journey. They traveled across the land as Louise's hooves made steady thudding sounds against the ground. Louise noticed that Cyril appeared troubled and asked if something was wrong. Cyril denied it, though he reflected that while the procession had merely been reported missing, there was also the possibility that they were already dead. He considered it flattering that such an important mission had been entrusted to him. Successfully completing it would add to his track record, but it was undeniably a heavy responsibility. Louise reasoned that thinking about it now would not change anything before asking whether the mountain ahead was their destination. Cyril confirmed that it was. He then pulled a sealed letter from his pouch, explaining that it was a letter the princess had written, which he had borrowed from the town hall. He asked whether Louise could track the princess's scent with it. Louise admitted that she was not particularly skilled at tracking scents but was still better than a human. She carefully sniffed the letter before quickly recognizing the scent. Cyril was surprised that she had identified it so quickly. Louise explained that the princess's fragrance was overwhelmingly strong, almost as though she were drowning in it. Cyril realized it was probably perfume. Louise remarked that the pungent smell made it easy to identify. Cyril recalled hearing that dragons possessed an exceptional sense of smell and thought it must have been difficult for them. He then decided they would follow the scent, and Louise readily agreed. After a while, they crossed rocky terrain as Louise's hooves made steady thumping sounds against the stones. Cyril reflected that the journey would have been difficult if he had been alone, but it had gone remarkably smoothly. He praised Louise for being truly amazing. Louise dismissed the compliment as nothing special, letting out a small, happy laugh. She then confirmed that this was a job. After Cyril acknowledged it, Louise decided that if the tracking job went well, he would give her a reward. Cyril repeated the word in surprise, and Louise affirmed it. When Cyril wondered whether there was something she wanted, Louise revealed that she wanted straw bedding made from well-dried straw, preferably soft and fluffy. Louise imagined herself resting comfortably. Cyril asked if all she wanted was straw bedding, deciding that it would not be a problem. Delighted, Louise suddenly dashed forward, startling Cyril. Determined to finish the job as quickly as possible, she accelerated at a rapid pace. Cyril smiled before falling silent for a moment. A memory surfaced of a man declaring that anyone who became emotionally attached to tools was worthless. Cyril frowned, realizing that, from the perspective of that guild, what he was experiencing would probably be unthinkable. Louise abruptly came to a stop, surprising Cyril. When he wondered what was wrong, Louise indicated that it was beneath them. Cyril looked on in confusion as she repeated herself, but he realized they were standing at the edge of a cliff and questioned whether the procession had fallen from there. Looking down, he spotted the wreckage of the princess's procession scattered across the bottom of the cliff. He wondered if the princess was inside the carriage. Louise confirmed it, and when Cyril asked whether she could get them down, she confidently indicated that it would be easy. They landed safely at the bottom of the cliff. Cyril surveyed the scene and found it truly gruesome. He carefully made his way through the wreckage until he discovered a seal bearing the royal crest. Recognizing it as the same crest, he confirmed that they had found what they were looking for. Seeing no sign of survivors, he wondered whether the princess was safe. As he tried to approach the carriage, an unseen force blocked him, leaving him startled. Louise identified it as a barrier. Cyril considered what they should do, and Louise decided that they should break it. Cyril agreed that they could use Louise's power to destroy it and entrusted the task to her. Louise understood and unleashed her power, completely shattering the barrier. Cyril praised her for doing a great job, and Louise responded with a small, happy laugh. Cyril entered the carriage and found the princess lying inside with her eyes closed. After examining her, he confirmed that she was still breathing and quietly sighed in relief. Noticing no serious injuries, he concluded that she should be all right. Louise remarked that the barrier had probably protected her. Cyril gently shook the princess's shoulder. She slowly blinked awake and looked around, wondering what had happened. The moment she noticed Cyril, she froze in shock before loudly crying out in alarm at his presence inside her carriage. Cyril tried to calm her, explaining that he was not a suspicious person and had come to find her. The princess reacted with confusion before seemingly realizing the situation. Cyril explained what had happened and she understood. He admired how calmly she was able to accept the situation despite everything that had occurred. The princess wondered whether there were any other survivors, as she could not see anyone else. Cyril looked at her and decided that they should hurry down the mountain so that someone could examine her. She worried about the soldiers, but Cyril reached out, acknowledging her feelings while explaining that only the two of them remained and that they would return for the others later. The princess accepted this and took Cyril's hand. She then turned her attention to Louise and wondered if she was a dragon. Cyril introduced the dragon as Louise. He then asked whether she could carry both of them. Louise reminded him about the straw bedding. Cyril assured her that he would buy as much as she wanted, as promised. The princess watched the exchange in confusion. Satisfied, Louise agreed to handle it. As they began their journey back, Cyril explained that Balor dragons walked steadily, making them comfortable to ride. He asked the princess if she was all right. Receiving no response, he called out to her again and asked whether something was wrong. The princess reacted in surprise before responding absent-mindedly and giving a small cough. She then confirmed whether Cyril was a dragon knight. Cyril acknowledged that he was. The princess asked which guild he belonged to. Cyril explained that he was not affiliated with any guild. Confused, the princess wondered why someone as capable as him did not belong to one. Cyril remarked that she was judging his ability even though they had only recently met. The princess explained that she could tell from the dragon's eyes that Louise truly adored Cyril. Cyril quietly wondered if that was really the case before falling silent. The princess said she had heard that a dragon knight acknowledged by dragons would undoubtedly be exceptional, and she questioned why someone like Cyril remained an independent knight. Cyril simply replied that many things had happened, and the princess accepted the answer. Not long afterward, they returned to the city. Rose was surprised that Cyril had already found the princess. After hastily confirming the lady's identity, she became flustered and asked them to wait while she contacted the higher-ups. As they waited in silence, Cyril noticed the princess looking at him. Wondering what was the matter, he waited as the princess expressed her utmost gratitude to him. She then considered how she might repay him. Cyril explained that he would receive payment from the town hall and told her not to worry about it. The princess then held out a handkerchief decorated with her crest. She explained that if he ever required assistance, he could present it to make an inquiry with her, and she would do her best to help him however she could. Cyril bowed deeply and expressed his sincerest thanks. Chapter 5 began with Cyril receiving payment for his task. After successfully rescuing the princess, he was immediately given his reward. Holding the payment in his hand, he noted that it amounted to 1,000 reals. He remarked that the reward was as large as expected. Louise called out to remind him to buy her straw bedding, but Cyril instinctively refused. Louise reacted in confusion and reminded him that he had promised. Realizing how it sounded, Cyril quickly corrected himself, explaining that he had not meant to refuse. He told Louise that 1,000 reals was an amount most people could only earn after a month of hard work. Rather than buying straw bedding, they could afford something much better. Louise was delighted to hear that they could buy something superior and wondered what it would be. Cyril answered that they would buy high-quality bedding. He considered giving an example but decided she would understand once she saw it herself. He then suggested they head to the store first, and Louise readily agreed. A while later, Cyril pointed ahead, indicating their destination. Looking around, Louise noticed that the shops in the area all seemed to sell items for dragons. Cyril explained that they also sold toys and other goods, though he doubted Louise would be interested in those. They decided to visit the store first. As they walked, a man called out to them. Turning toward the voice, Cyril was addressed by name. He fell silent for a moment before recognizing the man as Louis, a dragon knight from Lindworm, the Dragon Knight Guild to which Cyril had once belonged. Louis remarked that Cyril seemed genuinely surprised to see him. He explained that when he had returned from his mission, Cyril had already left the guild. Cyril simply acknowledged the remark. Louis commented that it was truly unfortunate before offering to speak with the guild so that Cyril could return to Lindworm. Cyril reacted with surprise that Louis would make such an offer, though he admitted he had absolutely no intention of returning. Louis replied that it would certainly be possible if Cyril first abandoned his obsession. Confused, Cyril listened as Louis identified that obsession as Dragon First. After confirming that was indeed what he meant, Louis explained that if Cyril let go of that foolish fixation, there would be no reason he could not start over at the guild. He added that Cyril unquestionably possessed the necessary skills. Cyril let out a small laugh and declined the offer, stating that he had no intention of abandoning his pledge. Louis urged him not to be so stubborn, arguing that an independent knight could not accomplish much in the present day. Cyril nevertheless insisted that he would continue working as hard as he could. Before Louis could continue, Louise called out to Cyril. She wondered what they were talking about and reminded him about her bedding. Cyril apologized before teasingly telling Louise that Louis had said she should stop sleeping for 12 hours. Louise reacted in shock and immediately growled at Louis in disbelief. Seeing Louise direct her hostility toward him, Louis began to stammer, wondering what the dragon intended to do. He then shouted at Cyril, pointing out that Louise was his dragon and demanding that he make her stop. Cyril calmly replied that he had done nothing and asked whether Louis had seen him give any commands. Louis clicked his tongue, admitting that he had not, but insisting that Cyril must have done something. He demanded to know what kind of magic Cyril was using. Cyril simply answered that it was because he cherished them. Louis responded with a short laugh, dismissing the explanation as nonsense. After Louis left, Louise wondered what was wrong with that human. Cyril replied that Louis was simply someone who could never agree with him and told her there was no need to pay him any attention. He reassured Louise that as long as she remained with him, he would make sure she could sleep for 12 hours every day. Louise felt relieved. Minutes later, they entered the shop, where the shopkeeper welcomed them. Noticing that they were shopping for a Balor dragon, he asked how he could assist them. Cyril explained that he was looking for bedding. The shopkeeper understood and invited them to follow him. Upon seeing the display, Louise reacted in amazement. Looking around, she realized that the entire area was filled with bedding. She repeatedly expressed her amazement before rushing eagerly toward the display. Cyril called out to Louise, but she did not seem to hear him. He sighed, remarking that she had already become completely absorbed, and apologized for her sudden behavior. The shopkeeper told him not to worry, explaining that the beds on display were samples for customers to try. Relieved, Cyril was pleased to hear it. Louise happily moved from one bed to another before excitedly deciding that she liked one in particular. Cyril looked at it and wondered if it was a slime bed. The shopkeeper confirmed that it was. He explained that this type of bed was also available for humans and possessed the elasticity of a slime, allowing it to sink just enough beneath the body to provide the ultimate sleeping experience. Louise repeatedly declared how much she liked it and decided that it was the best. Cyril asked whether she truly liked that bed, and Louise happily confirmed that she did. She added that it was far, far more comfortable than straw bedding. Hearing that, Cyril asked the shopkeeper for its price. The shopkeeper informed him that it cost 1,200 reals. Cyril reflected on the price, acknowledging that it was expensive, though it was a high-end product. He asked Louise if she wanted that one, and she confirmed that she did. However, she hesitated, realizing that it was rather expensive and wondering if buying it would really be alright. Cyril assured her that it was fine because she liked it, and that was what mattered. Delighted, Louise happily thanked him. Cyril then turned to the shopkeeper and decided to purchase the bed. The shopkeeper thanked him for his purchase before remarking that it was quite a remarkable sight. Cyril wondered what he meant. The shopkeeper explained that although he had seen many dragon knights speak to their dragons, this was the first time he had ever witnessed someone who genuinely seemed to be having a conversation with one. Cyril replied that it was because he treated Louise like family. After paying, Cyril and Louise left the shop as the shopkeeper expressed that he looked forward to serving them again. A while later, they walked through the town. Cyril remarked that he was glad Louise had found something she truly liked. Louise carried the package herself. Noticing how heavy it was, Cyril asked whether she was really alright carrying it. Receiving no answer, he called out to her again. Louise stopped and quietly wondered if everything was truly alright. Cyril asked what she meant and why she was suddenly bringing it up. Louise admitted that although it was late to mention it, 1,200 reals was even more than the reward they had just received. She felt that she had been too selfish. Cyril gently patted her and laughed softly. He told her not to worry because he had already made that promise. He explained that ever since Louise had come to him, she had helped him greatly with his work, and together they had also earned money. He added that she had been a tremendous help, so he wanted to reward her for it. Hearing this, Louise smiled happily and thanked him. A few days passed. Cyril remarked that the day's work had gone quite smoothly. When Louise did not respond, he called out to her with concern and asked what was wrong. Louise admitted that she was sleepy. Cyril reacted in confusion before understanding the reason. He reflected that the day's work had taken a little longer than expected, so it could not be helped. He then remembered that he still needed to report to the town hall. Having already promised not to overwork Louise, Cyril asked whether she could return home by herself. Louise answered that she could. Cyril told her to head home first and confirmed that it was alright when she sought reassurance. He thanked her for her hard work that day. Louise responded with a faint sound before leaving, staggering slightly as she walked away. Cyril watched her go and thought that there should not be any danger within the town, so she ought to be fine returning alone. He then realized that his dragon was able to head home by herself because he could communicate with her. This led him to wonder whether it was possible to simply instruct a dragon to return on its own. Confident that he could probably have his dragons work independently, he quietly concluded that he should buy another dragon. Meanwhile, a carriage rumbled steadily along the road. In the back of the moving carriage, a small spotted dragon sat curled up on the floor. It let out a low, rumbling growl with its eyes fixed straight ahead, seemingly gazing intently at something. Chapter 6 began with Cyril returning to the shop where he had bought Louise. The shopkeeper welcomed him and recognized him as the customer who had purchased the Belor dragon. Cyril returned the greeting and thanked him for his help the last time. The shopkeeper thanked him in return and asked whether the dragon was doing well. Cyril confirmed that she was. He explained that he was not there to complain or return her, as she was robust and performed her work well. Instead, he had come because he wanted another dragon. The shopkeeper thanked him for his continued patronage. Cyril admitted that he had just made a large purchase and was currently short on money. The shopkeeper replied that, unfortunately, they did not have another dragon available at the same price as the previous one. Cyril accepted that it was understandable. He reflected that he had come on impulse and supposed things would not always go as planned. Accepting the situation, he took out a sheet of paper and explained that the matter was not urgent, but if another dragon like Louise became available, he would appreciate being contacted. As he wrote down his information, something slipped out of his bag. The shopkeeper called his attention to the item he had dropped. Cyril picked up the handkerchief bearing the royal crest and noticed the shopkeeper's shocked expression. Wondering if something was wrong, he waited as the shopkeeper asked whether the crest belonged to the princess. Cyril confirmed that it did and explained that he had rescued the princess during his previous job, and that she had given him the handkerchief afterward. The shopkeeper reacted with surprise before asking whether Cyril would mind paying in installments. Cyril wondered if that would truly be acceptable. The shopkeeper assured him that it would and earnestly encouraged him to do so. Cyril realized that the shopkeeper was thinking much like he would have in the same situation. Hoping to build a relationship with someone connected to the princess, the shopkeeper was willing to offer him favorable treatment. Grateful for the opportunity, Cyril accepted and asked to pay in installments. Delighted, the shopkeeper thanked him for his purchase. They walked over to where the dragons were kept, and the shopkeeper asked whether Cyril had a particular species in mind. Cyril inquired about mushkashu. Mushkashu were a dwarf dragon species with 4 stomachs, 3 of which functioned as storage chambers rather than digestive organs. Their balloon-like bodies could inflate several times beyond their normal size, allowing them to store large quantities of food. Spotting one of the dragons, Cyril greeted it and introduced himself. The dragon inwardly dismissed him as yet another foolish human trying to speak with it, convinced that humans could never understand dragons. Cyril reacted in confusion and wondered whether that was a bad thing. The dragon answered that it was, explaining that even if dragons replied, humans could not understand them. It suddenly froze in shock before letting out a startled sound. Confused, the dragon realized that Cyril had understood its words and wondered how such a thing was possible. Cyril calmly explained that he had been born that way. He then told the dragon that he was considering buying it. The dragon remained indifferent and told him to do as he pleased. Surprised, Cyril asked whether it was truly alright with that. After a brief silence, the dragon concluded that humans would simply force it anyway, adding that humans were all disgusting creatures. Cyril replied that he wanted to persuade the dragon through his words. He stated that if the dragon truly objected, he would give up. The dragon reacted with surprise. Cyril then admitted that he genuinely wanted the dragon to come with him. Wondering why, the dragon listened as Cyril explained that while he certainly wanted it to work with him, that was not the only reason. He also thought the dragon was cute and beautiful. The dragon recoiled in shock, staggering backward in utter disbelief at what this human had just said. Cyril simply smiled at the dragon. After a moment, the dragon stated that it had one condition. Cyril asked what it was. The dragon seriously requested that he not give it a new name. It explained that it had been given a name while still inside its egg, and that name was Colette. Cyril complimented the name, saying it was a nice one and that he had no intention of changing it. He then asked whether she would come with him. Colette thought about it for a while before reluctantly agreeing to accompany him. She added that he should not misunderstand, as it was not because she had taken a liking to him. Rather, it was because he had accepted her keeping the name Colette. Cyril agreed, acknowledging that it was an important name to her. He then told Colette that he was counting on her. After completing the paperwork and purchasing Colette, the two began walking together. Noticing that it was still bright outside, Cyril asked whether they could stop by one place before heading home. He explained that it was where he wanted Colette to work. Colette realized that it was to be her workplace. Not long afterward, they arrived at Mount Millreef. Cyril held out a piece of ore and told Colette that he wanted her to collect or like it. Colette examined it and remarked that it had a pretty blue color. Cyril explained that natural cobanium ore was exposed on the surface throughout Mount Millreef. Since it had a wide range of uses, it sold for a high price. He wanted Colette to store the ore inside her storage stomachs and transport it to the town. Colette understood, and when Cyril asked whether she could do it, she confidently replied that she could finish the job in no time. Cyril thanked her, calling her a lifesaver. Colette added that it would be easy. Cyril then explained that he intended for her to carry out the work alone. He asked whether she could manage without him. Colette confidently agreed at first, but then became confused upon realizing that she would truly be by herself. Wondering what he meant, she listened as Cyril clarified that he wanted her not only to gather the ore, but also to bring it to the buyer in town entirely on her own. He wanted her to complete the entire process independently if possible. Colette faltered at the thought of being alone before asking about supervision. Cyril explained that he would not be supervising her. Colette reacted in shock and wondered what would happen if she decided to slack off. Cyril simply replied that he trusted her. Stunned, Colette questioned whether he was an idiot. Cyril reiterated that he trusted her to do the job properly. Although Colette seemed ready to argue further, she ultimately accepted the task. Cyril then went to speak with the buyer. Although the buyer was astonished, Cyril succeeded in reaching an agreement. Colette subsequently completed the entire process without Cyril's assistance, turning his idea into reality. Not long afterward, Cyril brought Colette to his home. He wondered whether she would be sleeping in the garden, though there was not much there. Colette replied that it was still far better than staying at the shop. She was then surprised to discover that Cyril already had another dragon. Cyril confirmed that her name was Louise. Louise let out a soft sound as she woke up. Upon noticing Colette, she wondered who she was. Cyril apologized for waking her, but Louise explained that she had sensed someone other than him nearby. Curious, she wondered who the newcomer was. Cyril explained that, although it was sudden, Colette would be living with them from then on. Colette introduced herself to Louise by name. Louise happily shared that she had also arrived only recently before greeting Colette and expressing that it was nice to meet her. Louise then remarked that there would now be 2 dragons living in the garden. Cyril confirmed that she was right. Louise observed that it might become a little cramped, and Colette agreed that it certainly would. Cyril admitted that they were right. Colette added that she did not mind, and Louise agreed as long as she had somewhere to sleep. Colette wondered whether Louise really liked sleeping that much, commenting that she was quite unusual. Louise innocently questioned whether she was, and the 2 dragons laughed together. Watching them, Cyril reflected that although they claimed not to mind, adding any more dragons would make the garden unreasonably cramped. He decided that he should begin considering a move soon. Chapter 7 began with the start of a new day as Cyril set out once again with a new companion. Colette observed that Louise really did sleep all day. Louise replied that she was still sleepy, and Cyril explained that this was simply how Louise was. Colette wondered whether Cyril had chosen Louise despite knowing that about her. Cyril confirmed that he had because he had promised Louise she could sleep for 12 hours each day. He added that if he had been unable to understand the dragon's language, he never would have known that she loved sleeping. He compared it to how Colette had not wanted a new name and remarked that their meeting felt like fate. Colette dismissed the idea, saying that calling it fate sounded cheap. Cyril agreed that she was right. As they continued walking, Colette suddenly came to a stop. Cyril asked what was wrong. Colette shook her head and insisted that it was nothing. Cyril remained unconvinced, believing that she had definitely been looking at something. Colette continued to deny it before turning toward another direction and pointing out that her workplace was that way. She then parted ways with them. Louise bid her goodbye, and Cyril told her to take care. Even so, he continued wondering what had caught Colette's attention. Following her line of sight, he noticed a shop selling cupcakes and quietly reached his own conclusion. Hours later, Cyril praised Louise for her work. Explaining that he had something to take care of, he asked whether she could wait for him. Louise sat down and agreed. Cyril entered the shop, where the shopkeeper welcomed him and recognized him immediately. He asked whether Colette had come by. The shopkeeper confirmed that she had and picked up a bag, explaining that she had left it there. Cyril was pleased that Colette had properly delivered it. Since he had instructed her to bring her first earnings to the shop that day, he explained that the money, while not much, was intended as the payment for his installment. He added that Colette would continue bringing the payments from then on. The shopkeeper replied that he understood and admitted that he was impressed. Cyril had managed to teach a dragon such a complicated task in only a single day, even training her to carry it out independently. He praised Cyril as exceptionally talented. Cyril laughed and thanked him. The shopkeeper continued by saying that Cyril was not only an outstanding dragon knight but also a person of admirable character. Curious, Cyril wondered what he meant by that. The shopkeeper explained that he had not expected Cyril to begin repaying the installments so quickly, since many customers delayed payment until they were reminded. Cyril replied that he felt deeply indebted to the shopkeeper for allowing him to pay in installments and wanted to maintain a long relationship with the shop. He also remarked that it was a good shop because it treated dragons kindly. Smiling, the shopkeeper responded that dragons were precious merchandise after all. The shopkeeper then remembered something and asked whether keeping 2 dragons had made Cyril's home feel cramped. Cyril admitted that it had, noting that the shopkeeper had guessed correctly. The shopkeeper explained that houses in the town suitable for keeping dragons generally fell into only 2 categories: those that could barely accommodate 2 dragons and those spacious enough for around a dozen. Cyril remarked that the shopkeeper was well informed. The shopkeeper then offered to introduce him to a suitable house, though it came with one special condition. Cyril expressed interest and asked what it was. The shopkeeper explained that the house was newly built, but for some reason dragons disliked it. Although it included a spacious dragon stable and experienced dragon knights had attempted to move in, the dragons had all refused to enter it. Cyril and the dragons visited the property the shopkeeper had described. Colette wondered whether they would be living there, while Louise remarked that it looked like a very nice house. Cyril explained that because no one had rented or purchased it for such a long time, they could obtain it cheaply if it proved usable. He added that since he could understand dragons, they might be able to discover the reason behind the problem. Pointing out the living quarters for humans and the separate dragon stable, he observed that the stable was remarkably spacious. He then asked Louise and Colette to try entering it. Both dragons happily agreed, but the moment they stepped inside, their expressions turned uncomfortable. Although the stable appeared perfectly ordinary, Cyril asked what the two dragons thought of it. Louise let out a low sound of discomfort, while Colette responded with a hesitant sound. Cyril called both of their names, and Louise admitted that she did not like the place. Colette agreed that she felt the same way. Louise explained that, for some reason, she disliked the smell. Cyril wondered whether it was something only dragons could perceive. When he asked if they knew where the smell was coming from, both of them believed it originated from the ground. Looking down, Cyril wondered if it was the dirt itself. Colette admitted that she could not stay there any longer and hurried outside. Cyril asked what kind of smell it was. After thinking for a moment, Colette confessed that she was not sure how to describe it. Louise explained that it smelled as though a dragon had been killed there and something had been left behind. Cyril realized it was similar to a stigmatized property and understood why neither dragon wanted to remain there. After considering the problem, he decided to replace the dirt. Calling out to Colette, he asked whether she could gather suitable soil from the wilds to replace the existing earth. Colette understood that she simply needed to store the soil in her storage stomachs and bring it back. Cyril then told Louise to rest. Although he had originally planned for her to transport the dirt he dug up, he decided to handle that himself. Louise softly apologized, and Cyril immediately put his plan into action. Several hours later, Cyril let out a sigh, remarking that replacing all the dirt had taken an entire day. He then asked the two dragons what they thought of the stable now. Louise replied that it was fine and believed it was good now. Colette agreed, saying the effort had been worthwhile. Glad that his decision had been correct, Cyril was pleased to hear their approval. He then declared that they would move into the new house. Louise commented that it was almost too large for them and felt very luxurious. She added that it looked comfortable to sleep in, making her happy. Cyril thanked both dragons, saying it was all thanks to their help. He especially praised Colette for all her hard work. At first, Colette reacted in confusion before naturally accepting the compliment. Cyril then told her that he had a gift and invited her to take a look. Colette froze in shock when she saw a large display of treats arranged neatly on a wooden shelf, including a tall three-tiered cake, several cupcakes topped with fluffy frosting, a large ring-shaped pastry, macarons, and soft, twisted breads. Louise wondered whether they were desserts that humans ate. Cyril explained that he had noticed Colette looking at them the previous morning and thought she might have wanted to eat them, so he had them specially made in large sizes for her. Surprised, Colette realized that they were meant for her. Louise observed that Colette liked sweets and playfully remarked that she was the unusual one. Flushing, Colette quickly stepped forward and insisted that it was not as though she liked them. Even as her tail wagged, she claimed that there was no way a dragon like her would enjoy sweets like those. Smiling happily, she reasoned that since they did not seem well off, letting them go to waste would be a shame, so she would eat them for Cyril. The following day, Cyril reported that there had been no anomalies during the patrol. Rose praised him for his good work, calling him a lifesaver. She greeted him and remarked that he now seemed to have two dragons. Cyril confirmed that he did. Rose commented that although it had not been long since he became independent, it was impressive that he was already managing two dragons while smoothly completing requests. Cyril thanked her. Rose then asked whether he intended to remain an independent dragon knight. After a moment of thought, Cyril replied that he had no plans to join a guild. Since becoming independent, he had asked around and learned that although Lindworm, his former guild, had been an extreme example, most guilds, and in fact almost all dragon knights, treated dragons as nothing more than tools. Rose clarified that this was not what she had meant. She explained that she already knew that was not what interested Cyril and that she had been referring to something else. When Cyril wondered what she meant, Rose asked whether he had ever considered establishing a guild of his own. Chapter 8 began with Cyril and Rose talking. Rose first explained that guilds were a type of association officially recognized by national governments and were classified as Dragon Knight associations. Cyril listened as she added that because Dragon Knights and dragons were so important to governments, guilds received many special privileges. Cyril asked what kind of privileges, and Rose explained that taxes were the primary benefit. Cyril confirmed that she meant things such as income tax, and Rose affirmed that she did. She continued by explaining that taxes related to dragons were also reduced, making it especially beneficial for anyone planning to acquire more dragons. Cyril admitted that he had not known that. Rose then added that, depending on a guild's capabilities, the abilities of its dragons would also increase slightly. Cyril reacted in surprise and wondered whether that was really true. Rose explained that when a guild reached a very high level, the increase could reach about 10%. Cyril remarked that even that was a significant advantage and admitted he had not known such an effect existed. He then wondered how it worked. Rose replied that she did not know the exact details either. She had only heard that it was connected to the relationship between the supreme god, Romancier, and the Dragon King, NM, though she did not truly understand it herself. Cyril concluded that establishing a guild sounded more worthwhile than he had expected and asked how he could found one. Rose explained that he would first need a backer, offering to serve as one herself if he wished. Cyril gratefully accepted. Rose then informed him that there was also a required deposit of 10,000 reals. Although she knew it was a considerable amount, it was mandatory. Cyril remarked that it was an enormous sum before suddenly remembering something. He opened his bag, causing coins to spill out with a clinking sound. Rose reacted in surprise as Cyril explained that only the previous day, Colette had discovered a rare ore. The scene then shifted back to the previous day. Colette excitedly called Cyril over and urged him to look at something she had found. She showed him an unusual rock, explaining that although it was its current color now, it had looked completely different when she discovered it that morning. Curious, Cyril examined the strange stone before quickly realizing that it changed color. Deciding to have it appraised the following day, he noted that it had indeed changed from the color it had possessed that morning. When he presented it to an appraiser, the stone was identified as a 4-color polylite. Cyril asked whether it was rare. The appraiser enthusiastically declared that it was worth 10,000 reals and immediately asked whether Cyril would be willing to sell it on the spot. The scene then returned to Rose as she finished checking everything. She remarked that Cyril was a lucky man. Cyril commented that he had never expected to spend the reals so soon. Rose then asked whether he wanted to submit his application immediately. Cyril confirmed that he did and entrusted the process to her. Rose handed him the application form, and Cyril began filling in the required information, including the representative's name, address, number of dragons, and their breeds. He paused when he reached the section asking for the guild name. Rose reminded him that it was the most important part. Acknowledging that, Cyril completed the final entry. After finishing the form, he handed it back to Rose. As she received it, she read the guild name, Dragons First, and reacted with surprise. Cyril confirmed that it was his choice, believing that a name reflected one's true self. Rose signed the document and stamped it. The moment the stamp touched the paper, it emitted both light and sound, and a small winged figure appeared before Cyril. Surprised to see a tiny girl, he listened as Rose explained that she was one of the guild fairies and served as a form of identification. Cyril accepted the explanation. The fairy quietly stared at him, leaving him unsure what he was supposed to do. Rose assured him that the fairy would simply follow him on her own and would be fine before asking him to take good care of her. She then presented another item and opened its case, revealing collars and ankle bands. Rose explained that they were tools used to measure dragon energy and that they would influence how much the guild's level increased. Cyril recalled that the dragons at Lindworm had also worn such equipment. Noticing his hesitation, Rose asked what was wrong. Cyril admitted that he was reluctant to put collars on the dragons and did not feel comfortable with the idea. Surprised by his answer, Rose suggested that he visit the dragon tool shop, explaining that it sold much more than just collars. A while later, Cyril met with Louise and Colette to discuss accessories. He explained that he had visited the dragon tool shop and found that it offered earrings, ribbons, and many other items. He wanted the two of them to choose something they would like to wear. Both dragons began thinking about their preferences. Louise decided that she wanted a sleeping bag. Cyril reacted in confusion, questioning the idea of a sleeping bag. He remarked that he did not think sleeping bags for dragons existed and would not consider one an accessory anyway. Accepting that, Louise suggested an eye mask instead. After thinking for a moment, Cyril replied that he could have one custom-made for her. He then confirmed that she really meant an eye mask. Louise affirmed that she did. Cyril reminded her that she would have to keep it on all the time. Louise replied that it was fine because Cyril had been wearing an eye mask the whole time as well. Confused, Cyril knew he was not wearing one. Deciding not to dwell on it, he turned to Colette and told her that he could have anything custom-made if she wanted it. Colette shyly hesitated before finally admitting that she wanted a ribbon. Repeating her request, she said she wanted something cute. Smiling, Cyril agreed to get her one and asked what kind of ribbon she preferred. Colette answered that she wanted something cute. Cyril reflected that he had not expected Colette to want something so girlish and realized that pointing it out would only embarrass her. He decided that he would speak with the dragon tool shop the following day. The next day, a staff member at the shop measured Louise and stated that an eye mask would be made in that size. The quoted price was 100 reals. Cyril then asked if 2 could be made, including a spare. The clerk agreed to make the necessary arrangements and explained that they would be ready for him to receive later. Cyril thanked her before leaving the shop. Afterward, Cyril asked Louise whether everything was alright. Louise confirmed that it was. For the time being, Cyril had given both dragons temporary collars to wear. Although neither of them seemed bothered by them, he still felt somewhat uneasy about it. Louise then admitted that she had never thought she would actually be able to ask for an eye mask and had not expected Cyril to grant her request. Cyril replied that it was what she wanted, so he saw no reason not to do it. Louise accepted his answer, smiled at him, and thanked him, calling him master. At that moment, Cyril noticed something glowing and wondered what was happening. He took it out and was surprised to discover that it was his guild card. Looking at it closely, he saw that the guild's level had already risen to level 2. Wondering how such a sudden change was possible, he immediately went to Rose and asked whether his suspicion was correct that guilds did not normally level up so quickly. Rose explained that, for a one-person guild with 2 dragons, reaching level 2 would normally take at least a month. Cyril remarked that since Dragon's First was a one-man guild, having more members would naturally make it easier to level up. Concluding that something was wrong, he voiced his suspicion. Rose asked him to wait a moment while she checked the records. After examining them, she found no errors and remarked that there did not appear to be any cheating involved. Cyril wondered how anyone could even cheat in the first place. Rose explained that some people temporarily borrowed dragons and registered them with a guild, only to remove them again after gaining the level increase. She added that there were always people searching for loopholes and taking advantage of them because they wanted the easiest path. Cyril acknowledged that he understood. Rose then clapped her hands and announced that the Dragon's First Guild had officially reached level 2 before congratulating Cyril. He thanked her and asked what changes came with reaching the new level. Rose handed him an item and instructed him to give it to the guild fairy. The guild fairy appeared and immediately began drawing. Cyril watched curiously and wondered what it was creating. Rose simply told him to keep watching. When the drawing was finished, Cyril picked it up and realized that it was a map of Borussel. Noticing a glowing dot on the map, he asked what it represented. Rose explained that it displayed the locations of registered dragons. Since the dot was positioned near the town hall, she concluded that it must be Louise. Cyril remarked that the feature was convenient. Rose then asked where the other dragon was. Cyril replied that Colette was working in the Millleaf Mountains and was probably outside the normal range. Surprised that he allowed her to work independently, Rose admitted that she had not known such a thing was possible. She then manipulated the map, explaining that because Colette was in the Millleaf Mountains, she could demonstrate another feature. Cyril watched in surprise as the map's viewing range zoomed outward. He commented that it was an excellent function. Rose agreed and pointed out that Colette was now visible. She explained that higher guild levels unlocked increasingly advanced features and encouraged him to continue doing his best. Cyril found it fascinating but again questioned why the guild had leveled up so quickly. Rose admitted that she still had not figured out the reason and found it strange herself. A while later, Colette returned home and Cyril welcomed her back. Colette wondered whether he had been waiting for her the entire time. Cyril explained that he had something to give her and expected that she would have returned by then. Confused, Colette watched as Cyril showed her a bag and invited her to look inside. She merely observed that it was a bag and grew curious. Cyril encouraged her to keep watching as he took something out of it. The moment Colette saw the ribbon, she became delighted. Cyril explained that while Louise's custom item had taken some time to make, he had found all kinds of ribbons available for purchase. Colette hesitantly admitted that it was cute, prompting a soft chuckle from Cyril. He told her that he thought it would suit her well. Suddenly flustered, Colette wondered what Cyril was trying to do. A minute later, Cyril finished tying the ribbon onto her. Admiring the result, he remarked that it looked great on her. Colette shyly began asking how she looked, but before she could finish, Cyril assured her that she looked cute. Trying to hide her embarrassment, Colette acted slightly huffy and insisted that she already knew that because it was obvious. Cyril agreed and Colette quietly thanked him. Cyril smiled in response. At that moment, Cyril noticed the guild card glowing once again, although its level had not increased. Looking over at Colette, who was happily enjoying her new ribbon, he arrived at the conclusion that perhaps the guild also gained experience as the dragon's affection for him increased. Chapter 9 began with Cyril looking at the map while observing Colette. As he rode Louise, he noticed that Colette was already busy even though it was not yet mid-morning. Louise believed Colette wanted to impress Cyril. Confused, Cyril listened as Louise recalled that Colette had spent the entire previous night giggling, to the point that it had been terrifying. Louise guessed that Colette had been remembering how her master had praised her. Hearing that, Cyril realized he had not known she was so happy to be praised. Since Colette's earnings had been quite good, he had simply complimented her for it. At that moment, Colette's dragon energy measuring ribbon and guild card had begun to glow, leading Cyril to think that perhaps his hypothesis was correct. He also noticed that Louise's eye mask had been completed, and she seemed quite happy to be wearing it. They headed to the post office, and after arriving, Cyril went inside to look for a job while Louise waited outside. As he examined the postings, his attention fell on a letter of commendation from the Lindworm Guild. Based on its achievements over the past year, the kingdom had recognized it as an outstanding exemplary guild. Although Cyril did not necessarily agree with the guild's policies, he understood that such recognition was what people expected. A guide with a proven track record naturally gave clients a sense of reassurance. He quietly resolved to do his best to earn a commendation himself. Before he could continue, Rue laughed at him. Turning around, Cyril saw that it was Rue, who mentioned hearing that Cyril had started his own guild. Rue remarked that such recognition was not something a one-man guild could hope for and insisted that Cyril would never receive one even if he wanted to. He proudly explained that many people had wanted to join Lindworm because of the award, including numerous B-rank Dragon Knights and others with more than 10 years of experience. Dragon Knights were distinguished by their accomplishments, and reaching B-rank meant being a well-known Dragon Knight working at the forefront of the profession. Cyril acknowledged that it was impressive. Rue then remarked that Cyril should have stayed with them a little longer. Cyril remained silent until Rue had left. Only then did he smirk to himself, thinking that while it might have been nice, he had no desire to return to Lindworm at all. Some time later, Cyril stepped outside and found the area in an uproar. Wondering what had happened, he heard Louise remark on how noisy everything had become. Cyril asked a nearby man what was going on, and the man explained that a dragon had apparently escaped, causing a massive disturbance and prompting a large-scale hunt. However, no one knew where the dragon currently was. After thanking the man, Cyril reflected that he had never heard of a dragon escaping before. Although he was curious about how it had happened, he decided not to burden Louise any further since she already looked sleepy. He began walking toward the town hall to report the incident while Louise lay down on the ground, looking rather sleepy. Suddenly, something slammed into Cyril and hurled him into a wall. Groaning in pain, he wondered what had hit him. A dragon then approached him, desperately seeking his help. Cyril looked at the dragon and immediately recognized her. The dragon explained that she could not stay there anymore because she did not like it there. Looking around, Cyril noticed that the surrounding people were watching them. He told the dragon to come with him for the time being and called for Louise to follow. Not long afterward, they arrived at their place and began talking. Cyril addressed the dragon by name, Emma. Emma was surprised that he remembered her. Smiling, Cyril explained that he remembered everyone he had spoken with there. Emma turned out to be a Zmei-type dragon that belonged to Lindworm. Even among small-sized dragons, Zmei-types were particularly small. However, they could be found in most guilds because of their combat-specific abilities. Cyril asked Emma why she had run away. Becoming emotional, Emma explained that she had been feeling unwell the other day and had wanted to rest, but no one had listened and she had been forced to work. As a result, she had made mistakes during the job and had nearly been seriously injured. To make matters worse, the guild master had declared that a dragon that made mistakes was worthless, and that if she made one more mistake, she should be worked to death or disposed of. Cyril remarked that they were the same as ever. Although it was common knowledge that dragons understood human language, what Emma had experienced did not feel acceptable to him. Emma then revealed that she had heard Cyril visited the town hall every day, so she had waited there for him. She pleaded once more for Cyril to let her stay. Cyril considered the rules regarding dragon transfers and wondered whether Lindworm would be willing to negotiate. In the next moment, a loud noise came from the gate, making him realize that someone had arrived. Emma immediately became anxious, knowing they had come for her. Cyril gently patted her, reassuring her that everything would be all right. He resolved to handle the situation himself and do everything he could to keep her. Rue then called out to Cyril from outside. He declared that he knew Cyril had Emma because there had been witnesses. Cyril admitted that Emma was indeed with him. Rue demanded that Emma be brought out so he could take her back. Cyril firmly stated that he wanted Emma transferred to his guild. Clicking his tongue in frustration, Rue questioned whether Cyril was serious. Cyril confirmed that he was. Rue insisted that they could not simply hand over a dragon that had run away. Cyril replied that he had heard the guild master say Emma would at least be worked to death. Rue demanded to know who had told him that. Cyril responded that there would not be smoke without fire, so he could not return Emma to a guild master like that. Returning to the matter at hand, he proposed negotiating a trade instead. Rue retorted that Cyril had no authority to discuss such matters and attempted to force his way inside. He shouted loudly enough for Emma to know that he was aware she was there. From inside, Emma reacted with surprise and fear after realizing Rue had spotted her. Rue continued calling for Emma to come out because they were leaving. Louise slowly woke up and observed Rue. She wondered who he was and asked Cyril if Rue was an enemy. Cyril concluded that the situation had apparently become that way. Louise immediately regarded Rue as her master's enemy and directed hostility toward him. Startled by Louise's outburst, Rue wondered what she was doing. Cyril remarked that such a response was only natural because they were already intercepting trespassers everywhere. Rue cursed in frustration. Cyril told him to take the conversation back with him, but Rue warned him to just wait, declaring that Cyril would get beaten. Shortly afterward, Guildmaster Dicky Raj met with Cyril and stated that he had heard everything. He knew that Cyril wanted to take in one of Lindworm's dragons. Cyril confirmed it and plainly explained that he could not stand to see Emma forced to work herself to death. Dicky responded with a sharp, dismissive sound. He remarked that Cyril was that kind of person after all and that he was someone difficult to work with. Cyril replied that Dicky could call him whatever he wanted. Dicky then declared that they had no need for another useless piece of trash like Emma, describing her as a dragon poisoned by incompetence. Even so, he insisted that did not mean Cyril could have her. Emma remained Lindworm's property, and they could not simply allow Cyril to take her without resistance. Cyril asked how much he would have to pay, but Dicky answered that it was not about money. He explained that when asking for something there was a certain attitude and a certain way of doing it. Hearing that, Cyril fell silent. He stood, moved the chair aside, then knelt on the ground and quietly pleaded. Looking down at him with the same dismissive expression, Dicky let out a low sound. He then stood, turned away, called Cyril a freak, and told him to go ahead and do whatever he liked. Cyril smiled as he watched Dicky leave. After some time, Cyril returned to their place, where everyone had been waiting inside. He entered and greeted Colette. Colette immediately regarded Rouet as the enemy, while Louise checked on Cyril, wondering if he was all right. Smiling, Cyril assured her that he was. Emma then approached him, and Cyril gently patted her, informing her that the deal had been settled. He told Emma that she was now free. Emma happily expressed her gratitude. Cyril asked what she intended to do next and whether she wanted to go somewhere else. Emma immediately decided that she did not. She liked Cyril's place. Accepting her decision, Cyril promised that he would take care of her from then on. Suddenly, the dragons began to glow, causing Cyril to wonder what was happening. Light surrounded the dragons. Sensing something unusual, Cyril felt a mysterious pull, as though something was drawing him in, and he reached his hand toward the light. In the next moment, something appeared in his hand. Looking closely at it, Cyril realized that it was a ring. The dragons stared with wide eyes in surprise, recognizing that it might be an artifact. Cyril gazed at the glowing object resting in his palm, noting that it was indeed an artifact. Chapter 10 began with Cyril asking what an artifact was. Emma explained that it was known as a hidden treasure of the dragons. Long ago, it had been created by the Dragon King NM through the power of the Allfather, Romanseer. It was said to appear only before those who were loved by dragons. Cyril reacted with surprise at the mention of people loved by dragons. He admitted that he had only heard the name of the Dragon King NM and asked whether the dragons knew anything more. Louise explained that they did not know the details, only that the Dragon King had ruled during the age when dragons dominated the land. They added that the Dragon King was said to possess a singing voice capable of making all living things prostrate themselves, and that even the Allfather, Romanseer, had been an admirer. Hearing this, Cyril concluded that it truly was a mythical world. Emma remarked that it was her first time seeing an artifact. Colette admitted the same, and Louise also acknowledged that it was her first time. Cyril became confused and asked how they could be so certain it was an artifact if none of them had ever seen one before. The dragons explained that they simply knew instinctively. Looking at the ring, Cyril commented that it appeared to him to be nothing more than an ordinary ring. If all three dragons instinctively recognized it, however, then it had to be an extraordinary treasure. Cyril held the ring out toward them. The dragons looked at him in confusion, unsure of what he meant. Cyril suggested that since it was a treasure of the dragons, perhaps one of them should take it, even proposing that Colette keep it in her stomach. Colette reacted with shock and firmly rejected the idea, explaining that placing an artifact in her stomach would invite divine punishment. Cyril immediately became concerned upon hearing that. Emma then explained that they were all far too frightened to even hold such an item. Realizing just how important the artifact truly was, Cyril decided that he would look after it for the time being. The dragons visibly relaxed after hearing his decision. Cyril slipped the ring onto his finger and wondered what kind of effects it possessed. The dragons watched nervously, curious whether anything had changed. At first, Cyril believed nothing had happened. Then he suddenly noticed something unusual. Above each dragon's head, he could see a health bar. The three dragons reacted in confusion, while Cyril remarked that he thought he finally understood. Colette asked what it was and urged him to explain so they could understand as well. Cyril looked at Colette and called her name. Confused, she looked back at him. He asked whether she had been feeling unwell that day. Colette replied that she had not been feeling unwell. Cyril explained that the artifact had told him so. The dragons reacted with confusion at the mention of the artifact, and Cyril confirmed that he could see 2 bars above each of their heads. The dragons immediately began looking at one another's heads. Cyril realized that the 2 bars represented the health of the body and the health of the mind, respectively. Realizing what the ring had revealed, Cyril apologized to Colette for making her work by herself, acknowledging that it was only natural for her to become tired. Colette dismissed his concern, insisting that the amount of work had been nothing to her. Cyril replied that he was glad she was working hard, but he did not want her to overwork herself, so he instructed her to rest the following day. He concluded that the artifact had likely come to him so the dragons would not push themselves too hard. Colette confirmed that all she needed to do was rest and readily agreed to take the day off. Looking at the ring, Cyril thought that if its purpose was to prevent dragons from overexerting themselves, then it was the perfect item for Dragon First. A few days later, someone knocked on the door. Since it was already nighttime, Cyril wondered who it could be. After opening the door, the visitor immediately apologized. He asked if Cyril was Cyril LaRose and apologized once more for disturbing him so late. The man introduced himself as Laurent Flory and explained that he had come with a request for Cyril. Cyril asked why Laurent had sought him out. Laurent replied that Morinier had already introduced Cyril to him. Recognizing the name, Cyril recalled that it was connected to the request to deliver a letter to Lady Catherine. He then asked what kind of request it was. Laurent explained that a certain Dragon Knight guild had failed an expedition. Cyril paused thoughtfully. Expeditions were usually missions against groups of monsters. They were extremely dangerous, but they also brought generous rewards and fame, though casualties among Dragon Knights and dragons were expected. Cyril asked how severe the failure had been. Laurent answered that the advance team, the first group of troops, had been completely annihilated. Cyril swallowed hard, remarking that such a disaster had not occurred in the past 5 years. Laurent agreed that this was indeed the case. Laurent went on to explain that the guild required everyone participating in an expedition to carry a will, and they wanted Cyril to retrieve those wills. Cyril hesitated, admitting that he was not strong enough to enter enemy territory under such circumstances. Laurent assured him that this would not be a problem. He explained that the guild's main force had already committed itself to an even larger expedition, leaving too few people available to recover the wills. That was the explanation he had been given. Cyril acknowledged the situation. Laurent informed him that the destination was Danzig Valley and proposed a reward of 5,000 reals. Cyril accepted the request. Laurent expressed his gratitude and added that, as long as Cyril recovered the wills, he was free to do whatever he wished with the fallen dragon tools. Cyril agreed. The following day, Cyril and the dragons prepared for their journey. While thinking about Danzig Valley, Cyril estimated that, taking Louise's sleeping schedule into account, the trip would take about 3 days. Louise addressed Cyril as Big Boss, and he responded to her. She then asked what Laurent had meant when he said they could do as they pleased with the dragon tools. Cyril asked whether she had overheard the conversation the previous night, and Louise confirmed that she had. Cyril remarked that she had excellent hearing before quietly realizing that she could clearly hear everything he was doing. He then explained that the remains of a battlefield were a treasure trove. Curious, Louise wondered what he meant. Cyril explained that those who fought in war carried valuable equipment, and selling what remained on the battlefield for money was considered normal practice. Colette admitted that the idea disgusted her and questioned whether humans truly did such things. Cyril replied that, more or less, they did. He added that there were stories about people being cursed after carelessly touching magical items that had not yet discharged their power. Emma pointed out that retrieving such items meant risking his life. Cyril explained that the equipment used by dragons and dragon knights was generally much more valuable than what ordinary soldiers carried. Emma then realized that he intended to take those items as part of his reward as well. Cyril confirmed that she was correct, though he admitted that he still felt a little guilty about doing it. Not long afterward, they continued their journey, traveling and resting along the way. Eventually, they arrived at their destination. Looking over the area, Cyril noted that they had reached Danzig Valley. Louise reacted with amazement. As they surveyed the surroundings, Cyril estimated that there were about 20 humans and around 30 dragons lying there. Louise remarked that it was a bloodbath, while Emma described it as horrifying and a gruesome sight. Cyril asked Emma whether she could sense the presence of any enemies nearby. Emma replied that the area was clear and that she sensed no hostility. Nodding, Cyril decided that they would split up and search the bodies for lockets. He showed the item to the dragons and explained that, according to what he had heard, every guild member was required to carry one. Louise and Emma acknowledged his instructions, while Colette remained where she was. She remarked that it was an unpleasant job. Cyril told her that she could rest if she wanted, but Colette decided to do it because it was still a job. Cyril thanked her, and Colette let out a dissatisfied sound as she began working. After some time, Cyril observed that they had collected all the lockets. Calling Colette over, he quietly appealed to her. Colette swallowed the lockets and stored them in her stomach. She then turned to him, asked whether they were finished, and urged everyone to return home immediately, admitting that she did not want to remain in a place like that any longer. Cyril asked them to wait, explaining that he had one more job, or rather, one more favor to ask of them. Louise paused thoughtfully, while Emma wondered if there was still something left to do. Cyril confirmed that there was. Looking over the fallen dragon knights and dragons, he revealed that he wanted to bury them. The dragons reacted with surprise, repeating his intention to bury them, and Cyril confirmed it. He explained that it was simply too sad to leave them exposed in the wilderness. Louise called out to him, and Cyril wondered whether she was refusing. Louise clarified that she was not, but asked whether they would also build graves for the dragons. Cyril confirmed that they would. After a brief pause, Louise remarked that Cyril was a strange person. She admitted that she had already known that, but felt he truly was an unusual person. Emma softly agreed with Louise's assessment, commenting that Cyril was indeed a strange person. Colette agreed as well. Cyril acknowledged that they had a point and apologized for making them accompany someone as strange as he was. Louise replied that it was not a problem at all. She repeated that he was a strange person, but added that he was also a good person. Together, the dragons expressed their gratitude to Cyril. Chapter 11 began with Rose apologizing for suddenly calling Cyril. Cyril replied that he did not mind and asked whether something had happened that required her to send him a letter personally. Rose informed him that his guild had reached level 3, adding that it would normally take about 3 months to achieve such a milestone. Cyril reacted with relief upon hearing the news. At that moment, the guild fairy appeared and grinned at him. Cyril wondered if the guild fairy had just smiled. He then noticed that Rose seemed troubled and asked whether something was wrong. Rose explained that, rather than something being wrong, Cyril had become the fastest person in history to raise a one-man guild to level 3. Repeating that it was the fastest record in history, she watched as Cyril admitted that he had never imagined being associated with such an achievement. Rose explained that this was why she had wanted to confirm the matter with him and asked whether anything came to mind that might explain it. Cyril guessed that perhaps it was because his guild, Dragon First, prioritized treating dragons with care. Rose remarked that it did not seem directly connected, but accepted that there was no helping it. Rose then informed Cyril that, having reached guild level 3, he could now use the guild storage. Afterward, Cyril went outside and observed that the guild storage looked like an ordinary storage building from the outside. However, magical protection allowed only guild members and their dragons to enter. He thought it might become particularly useful when combined with Colette's ability. As he walked, Cyril noticed people whispering while watching him and wondered whether news of Dragon First reaching level 3 had already spread. He understood that wherever there were people looking at him with interest, there would also be those who regarded him with suspicion. He reflected on the fact that people would actually suspect him. His thoughts were interrupted when he noticed a carriage stopped in front of his home. A young woman stepped out, and Cyril immediately recognized her as the princess. The princess explained that she had wanted to meet him after hearing about his achievements. Cyril asked what achievements she meant. She explained that he had successfully completed many different jobs and had raised his guild to level 3 faster than anyone in history. According to her, Cyril had become the Dragon Knight currently in the spotlight. Although still somewhat confused, Cyril accepted her explanation. Noticing the surrounding onlookers, he invited the princess inside first. After they were seated, Cyril asked what had brought her there. The princess explained that she had a favor to ask of the greatest Dragon Knight. Cyril modestly replied that she was giving him too much credit, but she insisted that he deserved such praise. Somewhat flustered, Cyril thanked her. The princess then revealed that there was a special dragon she wished to entrust to his care. Relieved, Cyril realized that the request concerned a dragon. Although a request directly from the princess carried considerable responsibility, he believed he could manage it if it involved dragons, since he could understand them. He asked whether she truly wished to entrust the dragon to him. The princess confirmed that she did. Cyril accepted the request, and the princess expressed her delight and thanked him. Cyril then asked what species of dragon it was. The princess answered that it was a phoenix species. Startled, Cyril wondered whether she meant the one known as the Child of God. The princess confirmed that she did. Cyril asked why she would entrust him with such an important responsibility. The princess stiffened and fidgeted as she searched for the right words. Cyril noticed her face gradually turning red and wondered if there was an embarrassing reason. She quietly murmured that she had wanted to see Cyril ride astride the Child of God, then abruptly struck the table with her hand and dismissed the remark as nothing, visibly flustered. She quickly explained instead that, because Dragon First was still a small guild, she believed caring for the Child of God would greatly increase its prestige. Cyril accepted the explanation, remarking that he had not expected her to think so far ahead for his sake. He sincerely thanked her, and the princess responded with an awkward laugh. Later, they rode Louise as they set out on their journey. The princess remarked that she had ridden the Child of God before, but she was amazed by how smoothly Louise moved without any jolting. She added that Cyril had trained Louise remarkably well. Glancing at the carriage following behind them, Cyril asked whether she was certain she did not want to ride in it instead. The princess assured him that she preferred riding Louise. Louise then told Cyril not to worry, explaining that the princess was someone she wanted to stay on good terms with, so she would walk carefully. Cyril gently patted Louise and quietly agreed that she was right. Cyril then addressed the princess, explaining that he had looked into the Child of God and had learned that it was rumored to have died long ago without leaving any offspring. The princess confirmed that this was true. When Cyril asked for the full story, she explained that the phoenix species known as the Child of God was believed to be the last of its kind in the world. In exchange for never having children, it possessed the ability to resurrect after death. Cyril reacted with surprise at the mention of resurrection. The dragons remarked that they had heard of such a legend before and explained that, despite being a dragon, the Child of God transcended the very existence of dragons and could not truly suffer harm as long as it lived. Cyril observed that the Child of God was extraordinary, and the princess agreed. She explained that it had not resurrected for several centuries, so she believed that if anyone could make it happen, it would be Cyril. Cyril quietly wondered whether he would truly be able to accomplish such a thing, never having imagined that the dragon he was entrusted with would not even be alive. 2 days later, they arrived at their destination. Looking around in amazement, Cyril realized they had reached a mountaintop that even carriages could not access, and he admired how impressive it was. A guard approached and greeted the princess, informing her that they had been awaiting her arrival. The princess thanked him for his service and immediately asked whether they could see the child of God. The guard confirmed that they could and reported that nothing had changed, as usual. Thanking him once again, the princess invited Cyril inside. Cyril asked the 3 dragons to wait outside, and they agreed. The massive doors slowly creaked open as Cyril and the princess entered. They walked through a long hall before reaching another set of doors. As those doors opened, Cyril saw the child of God and recognized it immediately. The princess confirmed that it was indeed the child of God. Advancing farther into the room, they came upon a massive skeleton lying before them. The princess explained that, as Cyril could see, only bones remained. She told him that the child of God had remained in that skeletal state for centuries, while the kingdom had continued protecting it in the belief that it would one day resurrect according to the legends. She then asked what Cyril thought and whether he could discover anything. After a brief hesitation, Cyril quietly replied that he would examine it first. He placed his hand against the bones and murmured that he could not learn anything that way. Suddenly, a voice spoke. It remarked that a human child had arrived and wondered how many decades had passed since humans had entered the temple, observing that it had been a very long time. Cyril reacted in confusion. The voice thoughtfully noted that the woman carried royal blood, while the man was merely a commoner. Cyril asked whether the voice was truly speaking. The voice responded with a brief sound before asking whether Cyril was actually speaking to it and addressed him as a human. Cyril confirmed that he was. The skeleton expressed surprise, remarking that it had never expected a human capable of understanding its language. It laughed loudly in astonishment. Cyril exclaimed that the surprise should have been his, since he had never expected a corpse to speak. The skeleton laughed again, commenting that although Cyril could understand dragons, he still did not think like an ordinary human. It then asked what had brought him there. Cyril hesitated before explaining that they had come in hopes of resurrecting it, as there were legends about it among humans. The skeleton let out a thoughtful hum and remarked that legends were merely legends, explaining that it had never taught humans the method of resurrecting it. Cyril reacted with surprise before turning to the princess to get her attention. She asked what was wrong and whether he had discovered something. After a brief hesitation, Cyril asked if there were any legends describing how to resurrect the child of God. Amused by the question. Looking puzzled, the princess replied that, as far as she knew, no such legends existed. The skeleton continued laughing, remarking that it had not expected that answer. It commented that human memories faded easily and that written records were just as easily discarded according to the whims of those who ruled. It then addressed Cyril as a human child and beckoned him closer. The skeleton instructed him to set it ablaze with fire, explaining that it resurrected from within the flames as many times as necessary. Cyril realized that the skeleton of the child of God was most likely a national treasure and hesitated at the thought of setting it on fire. He then reassured himself that everything would be fine. Since dragons did not lie, he decided to trust it. Turning to the princess, Cyril informed her that he was about to attempt to resurrect the child of God. She reacted with surprise. Cyril warned that what followed might be shocking and asked for her permission to proceed. The princess readily entrusted everything to him. Thanking her, Cyril took out a match and struck it, producing a small flame. He then tossed the burning match toward the skeleton. The princess cried out in surprise as she watched Cyril's actions in confusion. The match landed among the bones, its small flame flickering for an instant before a massive blaze suddenly erupted outward. Both Cyril and the princess stared in astonishment. Cyril wondered what was happening as the dragon's voice rang out from within the fire, laughing loudly and addressing him as a human child while expressing its gratitude. As the flames continued to swirl, the dragon's form gradually took shape. Cyril and the princess watched in amazement as the child of God declared that it had been resurrected. Chapter 12 continued with the resurrection of the child of God. Cyril stood frozen, flustered and unable to find the right words. After a moment, he noticed that the dragon appeared somewhat smaller than its enormous skeleton had suggested and asked the princess what she thought. He questioned whether this truly was the child of God. Overwhelmed by what had just happened, the princess lost her strength and stumbled to the ground. Unable to speak, she left Cyril wondering what was wrong. She quickly regained her composure and apologized for her behavior. The dragon admitted that the situation was its own fault, explaining that it had been several hundred years since its last resurrection and that it had forgotten how to suppress its power. The princess gasped in surprise and attempted to respond, but only managed to utter a few words. Cyril acknowledged the explanation, observing that beings like the dragon seemed to forget to suppress their powers and remarking that they were unexpectedly mischievous. The dragon laughed loudly and gently stroked Cyril, commenting that he was the first human ever to describe it as mischievous. Watching the exchange in amazement, the princess thought that, as expected of Cyril, he had already become friendly with the child of God. The dragon then asked whether Cyril's name was Cyril. After Cyril confirmed it and introduced himself as Cyril LaRose, he asked for the dragon's name in return. The dragon explained that it had no name. Laughing proudly, it declared itself to be the one and only child of God, making a personal name unnecessary because referring to the child of God could only ever mean it. Cyril remarked that such an arrangement would be inconvenient and asked whether he could give it a name. The dragon fell silent before asking whether the name would truly be for it. Cyril confirmed that it would. A quiet chuckle escaped the dragon, and its body trembled slightly before it suddenly burst into booming laughter. The ground immediately began to shake. Startled, Cyril asked what the sound had been. The dragon awkwardly apologized, admitting that its laughter had been so loud that it had caused a landslide. The trembling princess called out to Cyril. He calmly reassured her that everything was all right, explaining that a small landslide had occurred because the dragon's voice had been unbelievably loud. The princess accepted the explanation, thinking that such a thing was only to be expected of the child of God. Moments later, guards and accompanying dragons rushed into the room, urgently warning that a landslide was occurring and that the area was dangerous. They abruptly fell into confusion upon seeing the resurrected dragon standing before them. Cyril and the princess assured everyone that they were safe. Turning to the others, Cyril informed them that the being before them appeared to be the child of God. The dragons stared at it in astonishment. The child of God then protested, reminding Cyril not to set the matter aside because he had promised to give it a name. Cyril apologized. Privately, he reflected that despite being the child of God, the dragon was surprisingly easygoing. He then asked whether it was male or female. Laughing, the dragon explained that it belonged to neither gender. Unlike other species, it had no need to reproduce. Cyril nodded in understanding and began considering an appropriate name. After giving it some thought, Cyril proposed the name Chris and asked what the dragon thought of it. Repeating the name to itself, the dragon hummed with approval before laughing loudly and declaring that its name would be Chris from that day onward. Cyril immediately reminded Chris not to cause another landslide. Chris quickly realized how inconsiderate its previous laughter had been. The princess hesitantly addressed Cyril, and he responded. She asked what he had just done. Cyril explained that he had simply given the dragon a name. The princess reacted with surprise, leaving Cyril to wonder whether such an act had been disrespectful. Chris laughed and reassured him not to worry. Since Chris had personally accepted the name, there was nothing anyone could complain about. Relieved, Cyril accepted the explanation. Chris then asked Cyril how many openings he still had. Confused, Cyril asked what openings Chris meant. Chris replied that, since the opportunity was available, they might as well form a contract. Cyril asked what a contract was. Chris seemed surprised that he did not know and questioned whether Cyril was not a dragon knight. Cyril confirmed that he was. Chris then turned to the princess and wondered whether even the royal family was unfamiliar with such a thing. Cyril asked the princess whether she knew what it meant for a human and a dragon to form a contract. She admitted that she had never heard of such a thing. Cyril then turned to Louise, Colette, and Emma, asking if any of them knew about it, but each of them replied that they had never heard of it either. Chris reacted with surprise, wondering how the covenant between humans and dragons could have been forgotten in only a few hundred years. Cyril asked what Chris meant, referring back to the contract. After a thoughtful pause, Chris decided that rather than explaining it with words, it would demonstrate it through actions. Chris instructed Cyril to offer a single drop of his blood. Cyril agreed. He pricked his finger, allowing a drop of blood to emerge, and asked whether that was sufficient. Suddenly, the drop floated into the air. Cyril watched in surprise as it hovered. Chris explained that it was using its magic. The blood rose higher before suddenly bursting into a brilliant swirling light. Cyril wondered what was happening. Chris declared the result splendid and informed Cyril that the contract between them had now been formed. Chris explained that forming a contract allowed a human to wield a portion of a dragon's power. Cyril repeated the words in surprise, asking whether a dragon's power would truly become his. Chris explained that, in its own case, this meant complete control over fire. It instructed Cyril to try surrounding himself with flames. Fire immediately crackled and flared around Cyril. Alarmed, the princess called out as she watched the flames engulf him. Cyril calmly reassured her that everything was fine, explaining that the fire was not hot. He realized that this was what it meant to control fire. Chris laughed loudly and explained that this was its unique skill, a power possessed only by itself. Cyril thanked Chris. Chris dismissed the thanks, explaining that it was simply repaying Cyril for giving it a name. Watching everything unfold, the princess thought that Cyril was truly remarkable. She then made up her mind. Calling out to him, she earnestly asked to become an investor in his guild. Cyril reacted with surprise and sought clarification, realizing that such an investment would make the Princess Dragon First's patron. She confirmed that this was exactly what she wanted. Since the prestige of a guild was directly connected to the status of its patron, there could be no greater patron than the princess herself. She pleaded once more. Cyril reflected that he felt as though he should have been the one asking her instead. In the end, he accepted her offer and entrusted himself to her care. The princess's face immediately brightened with joy, and she sincerely thanked him. A few days later, Cyril stood together with Louise, Colette, Emma, and Chris. He recalled that, back at the temple, the princess had been present and everyone had been occupied dealing with Chris. Turning his attention back to the present, he confirmed whether it was possible for him to form contracts with the other 3 dragons as well. Chris confirmed that he could. Chris encouraged Cyril to ask anything he wished, declaring that it would answer every question. Cyril responded with a nervous laugh, while one of the dragons let out a sigh. Colette quietly remarked that Chris sounded rather arrogant. Louise agreed while Emma laughed. Although the 3 dragons had initially been intimidated by the child of God, they had grown accustomed to Chris after spending several days together. Cyril quietly observed that anyone who spent time talking with Chris would soon realize how easygoing the child of God actually was. Chris explained that Cyril could form a contract with any dragon, but the number of contracts he could make depended on how many openings he possessed. Cyril asked what an opening actually was. Chris explained that it was like writing on paper. The amount that could be written depended entirely on how many pages were available. Cyril admitted that he felt as though he understood the explanation, yet at the same time did not fully understand it. He realized that, based on Chris's explanation, he could currently form a contract with only one more dragon. He then asked whether it would be possible to increase the number of openings in the future. Chris assured him not to worry, explaining that he certainly could because humans were capable of growth, unlike Chris itself. Curious, Cyril asked whether that meant Chris could not grow. Chris burst into loud laughter and declared that this was only natural. As the one and only immortal existence, Chris proudly proclaimed itself to be the greatest being, already complete. Colette let out a sigh and remarked that Chris should grow up a little in terms of attitude. Chris reacted with interest and questioned what Colette meant before observing that she was the one who truly needed to grow up. Colette immediately demanded to know what Chris meant by that. Laughing again, Chris remarked that there was no need for Colette to hide it because everything about her was obvious. Chris declared that humans would describe Colette as a tsundere. Annoyed, Colette stomped her foot before suddenly biting Chris, causing Chris to yelp in surprise. Chris demanded to know what Colette was doing, while Colette insisted that Chris was the one saying strange things. Watching the exchange, Cyril remarked that the two of them certainly got along well. He then encouraged Louise and Emma to interact that way as well. Louise admitted that it would be rather difficult for her, and Emma agreed. Cyril then turned back to Chris and asked whether it could check how many openings he had. Chris agreed to examine him and instructed Cyril to prepare a glass of water. Cyril did so. Chris then told him to hold the glass with both hands, close his eyes, and imagine himself alone in an empty room. Chris continued by instructing him to picture himself as a slime that had absorbed the water inside that room, growing larger until he filled the room completely and the water overflowed from the glass. Cyril suddenly reacted in astonishment, wondering what was happening. Chris burst into loud laughter before praising him, remarking that the result was exactly what it had expected. Chris then revealed that Cyril possessed more openings than anyone it had encountered throughout its long life. Declaring the outcome extraordinary, Chris proclaimed Cyril to be the finest vessel. Chapter 13 began with Cyril wondering whether he truly had that many openings. Chris confirmed that he did and explained that Cyril possessed enough openings to form contracts with as many dragons as the number of women an emperor might have in a harem. Cyril questioned the comparison but concluded that having many openings was clearly advantageous. The dragons praised him, calling him amazing and incredible. Cyril noticed that Colette seemed unusually quiet and asked what was wrong. Colette replied that it was nothing. Chris laughed and remarked that this was what humans called a maiden's heart. Colette responded that the remark had been unnecessary. Chris continued teasing her, pointing out that instead of calling the comment strange, Colette had described it as unnecessary. Laughing once more, Chris was promptly bitten by Colette. Chris repeatedly apologized until Colette finally released the bite, leaving a clear set of teeth marks behind. Cyril observed that Chris healed the wound with fire. Chris confirmed that this was correct and proudly asked whether it was not marvelous. Cyril admitted that he was less convinced by the lingering bite mark. Beside him, Louise sighed, complaining that she was soaking wet and that everything had become flooded. Cyril then turned to Louise and asked whether he could form a contract with her. Louise readily agreed. Chris instructed both of them to offer a drop of blood, and a drop from each rose into the air. Louise suddenly made a puzzled sound. Cyril asked what was wrong, and Louise explained that the area beneath her throat had become strangely itchy, making her feel odd. Concerned, Cyril asked whether she was alright, and Louise assured him that she was. Louise then gazed at Cyril. Noticing her expression, Cyril asked what was wrong this time. Louise looked at him dreamily, feeling that Cyril appeared more handsome than usual and almost godlike. Cyril wondered whether it was because of the contract. At that moment, Chris announced that the contract had been successfully formed. Immediately afterward, Cyril felt a new skill flow into his mind. Louise remarked that this was the effect of the contract. Cyril realized that it was Louise's ability. Chris asked what kind of power it was. Cyril assumed Chris would already know, but Chris explained that every contract was different. While species determined certain abilities, others originated from the individual dragon itself. Cyril understood and concluded that Louise's power was likely an individual ability. Deciding to demonstrate it, he sat down and instantly fell asleep, only to wake up moments later. The others watched in confusion. Colette realized that Cyril had fallen asleep immediately before waking again. Smiling, Cyril explained that although it resembled Louise's sleeping ability, that was not the true effect. He raised his finger, and Chris pointed out that the wound from earlier had completely healed. Cyril concluded that the ability could be described as sleep regeneration, allowing his body to recover more quickly whenever he slept. Chris reacted with surprise before laughing, remarking that it was practically healing magic and an excellent ability. Cyril praised the skill and thanked Louise, who was pleased to hear it. Cyril then turned to Emma and asked whether she would allow him to form a contract with her next. Emma happily agreed. As the contract was being formed, Cyril noticed Emma behaving strangely and asked whether something was wrong. Emma merely giggled and insisted that it was nothing. After some time, Emma asked whether the process had finished. The moment the contract was complete, Cyril realized that the ability he had received was intended for combat. Chris thoughtfully suggested that Cyril try using it against him. Cyril asked whether Chris was certain. Chris assured him that such an attack would not make him flinch in the slightest. Accepting the challenge, Cyril declared that he would not hold back. Gathering the power, he unleashed a stream of fire bullets at Chris. Chris remained completely unharmed. Cyril marveled at how straightforward and easy the ability was to use. Emma asked whether the skill would be useful, and Cyril answered without hesitation that it certainly would. Turning back to Chris, Cyril checked whether he was alright. After letting out a groan, Chris burst into laughter and encouraged Cyril to use the attack even more. Colette huffed at Chris, and Chris noticed her expression. Chris explained that fire was the source of its life. As the two continued bickering, Cyril examined the newly acquired skill and realized that it was called Nine-Fingered Fire Bullet. He wondered why it used only 9 fingers. When he attempted to activate it again, however, nothing happened despite repeated attempts. Confused, he questioned why it would not work. Chris explained that the missing finger was the right thumb and that, among humans, the right thumb symbolized power. Chris then asked whether Cyril had ever seen kings or emperors wearing rings on their right thumbs. Cyril admitted that he had not, adding that he had never even met a king or emperor. Chris suggested that it was probably a symbol of those who had formed contract. Cyril accepted the explanation. He then finally turned his attention to Colette and asked her. Colette readily agreed. A drop of blood rose from each of them, and in the next moment, the contract was formed. Colette asked whether it was finished, and Cyril confirmed that it was. He explained that he already knew the ability was related to eating, though he could not properly test it at the moment. From what he understood, any food he consumed would be converted into energy and stored somewhere separate from his body. It also appeared that he could store an unlimited amount and draw upon it whenever he wished. Chris pointed out that this meant Cyril would never become fat regardless of how much he ate. Cyril agreed that this seemed to be the case. Thinking about future journeys, he concluded that the ability would be especially useful while traveling and thanked Colette. Colette replied that it was not as though she would lose anything by sharing the ability. Chris laughed and remarked that it was fortunate for Cyril, adding that if something had gone wrong with the contract, Cyril might have become extremely fat every time he ate, just like that maiden, referring to Colette. Colette immediately protested that she was not fat before biting Chris once again. Chris cried out in pain. Watching the exchange, Cyril remarked that this time Chris had brought it upon himself. Several days later, Cyril sat at a table inside a room. Sebastian Bernhard greeted him and remarked that it was a pleasure to meet him. Cyril introduced himself, and Sebastian expressed that meeting Cyril was an honor. Cyril responded somewhat awkwardly. Although he had accepted many different requests by now, he still was not accustomed to receiving such formal respect. Sebastian placed an envelope on the table and explained that it was a letter of referral from Molinier. Repeating the name to himself, Cyril opened the letter and realized that it was another referral from Lady Catherine. He concluded that Sebastian was one of Count Molinier's clients and made a mental note to thank Lady Catherine later. Confirming that the letter was indeed from her, Cyril asked how he could help Sebastian. After apologizing for the inconvenience, Sebastian requested that Cyril acquire dacite stones. Cyril quietly repeated the name of the stones. Sebastian specified that each stone should be about the size of a cocotte and that he needed 100 of them. He then asked whether such a request was possible. Cyril hesitated, admitting that he did not actually know what a dacite stone was. At that moment, Chris suddenly burst into the room, laughing loudly and remarking that the request was interesting before encouraging Cyril to accept it. Sebastian was visibly startled. Cyril immediately called out to Chris, telling the dragon not to appear so suddenly, but Chris merely continued laughing. Sebastian apologized in surprise, explaining that he had not realized Chris was Cyril's dragon. Cyril replied that Chris was also at fault for startling him. Turning to Chris, Cyril asked what the dragon was thinking. Chris explained that it knew where dacite stones could be found and guaranteed that Cyril would succeed. Hearing that, Cyril asked if Chris was certain before agreeing to accept the request. Sebastian expressed his sincere gratitude. He then remarked that, as expected of the Dragon First Guild, he was impressed by how quickly Cyril had made his decision regarding the request. Cyril reacted with confusion. The scene then shifted to Cyril, Chris, and Colette traveling together in the open. Colette let out a sigh and complained about why Chris was coming along as well. Chris laughed and wondered whether Colette had wanted to be alone with Cyril. Colette immediately dismissed Chris as an idiot. Cyril turned to Chris and remarked that it seemed Chris already knew where the stones could be found. He then asked what a dacite stone actually was. Chris paused thoughtfully before explaining that a dacite stone was a type of gemstone with an ordinary appearance, making it something humans generally did not find attractive. Even so, obtaining it was dangerous, which was probably why the request had been given to Cyril. Cyril asked whether that meant humans still considered it valuable, and Chris confirmed that this was exactly the case. Chris continued by explaining that a dacite stone revealed its true value only when bathed in moonlight. After absorbing the moonlight, it emitted a radiant glow. Because of this characteristic, it was known as the Dragon Night Gem. Cyril guessed that it must be beautiful. He then asked why the word dragon was part of its name. Chris casually replied that it was simply to make it sound more impressive. Cyril questioned where Chris had learned that and pointed out that Chris had still not revealed the location of the stones. Chris merely let out a quiet chuckle, leaving Cyril confused. When they finally arrived, Cyril looked around and asked what the place was. Chris answered that it was a volcano. Judging by the constant rumbling, Cyril remarked that he could already tell. Chris explained that the volcano was called Tony Bin. Cyril acknowledged the name before pointing out that it was beside the point. Laughing, Chris directed Cyril's attention toward the lava and revealed that the dacite stones were inside it. Chris asked whether Cyril could see the transparent objects scattered throughout the molten rock. Cyril quickly spotted them in surprise. Colette wondered how they were supposed to retrieve the stones when they were submerged in lava. Chris chuckled and explained that an ordinary human would not be able to do it, but that it would not be a problem for them. Cyril immediately realized that Chris was referring to the power granted by their contract. Since such a task would indeed be impossible for a normal person, he finally understood why the request had come to him. He then asked whether the lava itself would truly pose no danger. Chris replied that Cyril could even enter it naked and that it would feel no different from soaking in a hot spring. Cyril declined that particular suggestion. As he approached the lava, Colette called out to him, worried that it might still be dangerous. Cyril assured her that he would be fine. He explained that he trusted the dragons and believed none of them, not even Chris, would deceive him in such a way. Colette responded with a dissatisfied huff. Cyril stepped directly into the lava and immediately spotted the stones beneath the surface. To his surprise, he realized that it truly was not hot at all. Colette stared in amazement while Chris burst into loud laughter, praising Cyril for doing well and calling him a friend. Turning back to Chris, Cyril pointed out that Chris had been the one to insist everything would be fine. Chris admitted as much but remarked that, even so, no one else would have jumped into lava so readily without hesitation. Cyril thoughtfully accepted the remark before reaching down to collect the first stone. Holding up a dacite stone, Cyril commented that extracting it felt much like pulling something from thick mud. Judging by how easily it came free, he concluded that gathering 100 of them would not be difficult. Colette urged him to finish quickly and come back soon, admitting that merely watching him stand in the lava made her feel uncomfortably hot. Cyril agreed. As he continued collecting the stones, Cyril reflected that the request would earn him 20,000 reals, making it an unbelievable bargain compared to the jobs he had accepted in the past. Chris remarked that this was simply how the human world worked. Those with power and fame earned far more despite performing the same labor. Chris explained that this was the reward for Cyril's own efforts. Smiling, Cyril sincerely appreciated those words. Chapter 14 began with people discussing a particular guild. One person asked another whether they had heard of it. The other reacted with surprise upon hearing the name Dragon First, and the first confirmed that it was indeed the guild in question. Nearby, a hooded figure listened in silence while another person complained that they were tired of hearing stories about Dragon First's astonishing rise, describing its achievements as strange. Someone else insisted that the guild had to be involved in something suspicious. The discussion then shifted to the rumor that the princess had become Dragon First's patron, prompting shocked reactions. The group wondered what kind of encounter could have led to a guild like Dragon First gaining such support and concluded that they could no longer criticize the guild so casually. The hooded figure quietly rose and reflected on this Dragon First guild. Not long afterward, Cyril found himself seated across from the hooded figure. As Cyril hesitated, the figure introduced himself as Six. Repeating the name, Cyril thought it was obvious that the man was concealing something. He asked what business Six had with him. Six explained that he had a request for Cyril LaRose. The task involved transporting certain goods. Cyril asked for further details. Six stated that completing the job would earn Cyril 30,000 reals. Startled by the unusually large reward, Cyril reflected that transporting cargo was normally one of the simplest jobs available. The payment was far too generous, convincing him that the request was almost certainly suspicious. Cyril asked exactly what he would be transporting. Six replied that he could not reveal that information. He explained that Cyril only needed to deliver the goods to the designated destination in the same condition in which they were received. Cyril realized that he was expected not to ask unnecessary questions. Although the arrangement seemed dangerous from every angle, it also piqued his curiosity. Without warning, Chris suddenly burst into loud laughter, startling Six. Declaring that he had arrived, Chris interrupted the meeting. Cyril noted that it was Chris again. Chris remarked that the discussion sounded interesting and expressed a desire to join in. Cyril admitted that the request certainly sounded intriguing, though he still had reservations. Chris proudly declared that nothing could remain hidden before someone as great as himself and announced that he would uncover the truth from Six. Cyril teasingly questioned Chris, prompting Chris to huff and accuse Cyril of doubting him. Chris fixed his gaze on Six and demanded that he reveal everything he was hiding. Six immediately flinched and began trembling violently while Cyril watched with a weary sigh. Cyril asked what Chris had done. Chris casually explained that he had merely applied a little pressure and claimed that Six would now answer every question honestly. Accepting that explanation, Cyril continued the discussion and once again asked what the cargo actually was. Six hesitated before finally admitting that it was Dragon Tear incense. Cyril repeated the name while Chris remarked that it sounded nostalgic. Chris explained that Dragon Tear incense was an aromatic substance with a hypnotic effect when burned, allowing those who inhaled it to dream of whatever they desired. Cyril realized that it essentially allowed people to experience any hallucination they wished. Chris clarified that Dragon Tear incense produced dreams rather than harming the body, or at least that was how it appeared. Even so, it had been designated as a prohibited item by the Human King. Cyril immediately realized that the request involved smuggling forbidden good. Six nervously confirmed that this was correct. Cyril then asked why the incense had been banned despite having no harmful physical effect. Chris explained that although it caused no bodily harm, it had significantly lowered birth rates because people became absorbed in indulgent, salacious dreams. Cyril acknowledged that such reasoning made sense. Even so, Chris remarked that banning it altogether seemed excessive because there were people who genuinely needed it. Thoughtfully, Cyril asked what kind of people Chris meant. Chris offered the example of an elderly man who had lost the wife he had spent many years with. Cyril understood immediately and agreed with Chris's reasoning. While he admitted that allowing such an item to spread unchecked could become troublesome for those who governed the country, he also recognized that some people truly relied on it. Chris laughed loudly, remarking that such a conclusion was exactly what he expected from Cyril. Turning back to Six, Cyril stated that he would accept the request. Six visibly relaxed and acknowledged his decision. He then instructed Cyril to travel to the location marked on the map, present the tally upon arrival, and receive the goods there. Not long afterward, Cyril and the dragons traveled to the designated location. Upon arriving, Cyril recognized it as Nyarko Fort and stated that they had come to collect the Dragon Tear incense. Looking around, he noticed that many people were standing along the castle walls. As they approached, a man stepped forward and asked who they were. Cyril presented the tally, and after recognizing him as a member of Dragon First, the man allowed them to enter. However, as Cyril and the dragons moved farther inside, people gradually surrounded them. Colette quietly wondered what they were planning. A one-eyed man stepped forward and addressed Cyril as the guildmaster. After apologizing, he explained that this was the first time they had entrusted Cyril with a request. He then demanded that Cyril demonstrate his strength. Cyril questioned why he needed to prove himself when they had been the ones to hire him. The man chuckled, explaining that it was not unusual for people's reputations to exceed their actual abilities. As those around them began drawing their swords, Louise anxiously called out to Cyril. Recalling the power he had gained through his contract with Emma, Cyril unleashed Nine-Fingered Fire Bullet. A series of loud explosions echoed through the area, leaving the surrounding men stunned. The one-eyed man grimaced, cursed under his breath, and reluctantly admitted that the display had been impressive. Exhaling, Cyril asked whether the demonstration was satisfactory. The man replied that it was sufficient, acknowledged Cyril as reliable, and instructed him to follow. Chris quietly chuckled and observed that Cyril's response had been rather extreme, asking whether he had used everything he had. Cyril wondered if Chris had noticed. He explained that he had only used 30% of the energy he had stored. Thanks to his contract with Colette, he could store energy from the food he consumed, though he had not accumulated very much yet. Louise asked whether Cyril was alright, and he assured her that he was. Cyril believed that his response had been necessary under the circumstances. Chris praised Cyril's judgment, remarking that it had been admirable not to hesitate. Chris then commented that the irritated looks they continued receiving were becoming bothersome. Cyril agreed, pointing out that the others had been the ones to challenge them in the first place. Chris let out a huff and cast a sharp glare at the nearby guards, causing them to panic and flee. Cyril called out to Chris, who responded with booming laughter and explained that he had merely glared at them slightly. Cyril thanked Chris, and Chris replied that there was no need for thanks because they were friends. The one-eyed man stammered that no one had told him Cyril was traveling with such a monster. Cyril merely acknowledged the remark before changing the subject and asking where the goods were, wondering whether they had not yet arrived. Clicking his tongue, the one-eyed man decided that conducting the exchange outside would be sufficient and called for his men. One of them answered nervously. Emma quietly wondered why the man had stopped there instead of bringing them farther inside. Chris reasoned that the man had concluded he could not control Chris and therefore considered it too dangerous to reveal the interior of their base to Cyril. Emma understood and concluded that they were afraid because of what Cyril and Chris had demonstrated. The men carried over a crate and identified it as the requested cargo. The one-eyed man instructed Cyril to deliver it to a shop owned by a man named Gigu in Man-O-War, explaining that Gigu would pay him upon delivery. He also warned Cyril that Man-O-War had an outer wall where inspections were conducted at the entrance, leaving Cyril to figure out how to get the goods through. After leaving Nyarko Fort, Cyril quietly reflected on the inspections and wondered how they should proceed. Chris remarked that it would be disastrous if dragon tier incense were discovered during an inspection. Colette asked what an inspection was. Chris explained that large towns occasionally conducted inspections to regulate the people and goods entering and leaving by checking everything at the gate. Cyril observed that Chris was surprisingly well informed. Chris explained that he had experienced such inspections several times while staying with Lindworm. Cyril considered the situation. He knew he could not reveal that he was carrying prohibited goods, and he certainly did not want to be arrested. Although the incense was currently stored inside Colette's stomach, Chris pointed out that members of the mushkashu species would likely be searched first during an inspection. Cyril agreed, reasoning that the inspectors probably knew about the species' characteristic. Chris then asked what they intended to do. As Cyril pondered the problem, he noticed a river nearby. The sight suddenly gave him an idea. He called out to Colette. After responding with a puzzled sound, Colette listened as Cyril asked whether he could request a favor from her. Chapter 15 began at the inspection point of the town of Man-O-War. Cyril called out to Colette, reminding her that they would act according to their plan, and Colette agreed. A guard stopped them and asked whether Cyril was a dragon knight. After Cyril confirmed it, he introduced himself as Cyril LaRose from the guild Dragon First, and presented his guild proof. The guard then gestured toward Colette, whose body looked plump, identified her as a mushkashu species, and asked what was inside her stomach. Cyril claimed it was nothing special, but the guard insisted that he would be the one to judge and ordered everything to be brought out. Cyril asked whether he meant all of it and the guard confirmed. Although Cyril hesitated, he decided it should be fine since they had already arrived. Colette suddenly surged forward and disgorged a massive amount of water, shocking everyone present. When the guard questioned what he was seeing, Cyril explained that it was only water and remarked that it was a necessity during a journey. The guard responded that such an excessive amount was unnecessary. Cyril pointed out that Colette had already disgorged everything and asked whether they could pass now. Flustered, the guard declared it sufficient and allowed them to enter. Chris remarked that getting through the inspection had been amazingly easy. Cyril noted that it was not a method they could rely on every time. Although Colette had expelled all the water, the prohibited item, dragon tier incense, still remained inside her stomach. Cyril stated that their next objective was to find a man named Gigu and observed that Man-O-War was much livelier than Boarusel. Chris added that the town seemed to have been built by someone who had once been the guildmaster of a Dragon Knight guild. Surprised, Cyril wondered how anyone could build a town of their own and thought that, if it were a town for dragons instead of humans, he would like to build one as well. Moments later, Louise drew Cyril's attention to something nearby. Cyril noticed a signboard bearing the same crest as the tally and decided they should go inside to investigate. After they entered, a man asked who they were. Cyril introduced himself and asked whether the man was Gigu. The man confirmed his identity and acknowledged Cyril's arrival. Gigu immediately asked where the goods were, prompting Cyril to turn to Colette and have her bring them out. Colette convulsed and set the crate down with a heavy thud. Cyril asked Gigu to confirm the goods. Gigu opened the box, sniffed its contents, nodded in satisfaction, and confirmed that he had received the items. He then gestured for his men to bring out the crates, pushed them toward the group, and presented them as the promised reward. Cyril called Colette's name, and Colette stared at the crate. Guigou asked whether Cyril intended to count the money, but Cyril declined, explaining that if the amount was insufficient, he simply would not accept such requests again. Guigou merely huffed in response as Cyril left. As they walked away, Louise remarked on how amazing it was that they had earned 30,000 reals so easily. Cyril observed that they had received such a large sum merely for transporting dragon tier incense, and guessed that the people handling it would profit even more. He added that he intended to learn more about it. When they arrived at the inn, Cyril remarked that it was unbelievable for an inn to have a dragon stable and concluded that such a feature was to be expected in a large town. Emma noted that they had found so many merchants willing to handle dragon tier incense simply by asking around and expressed her surprise. Cyril agreed, adding that it seemed countless people would accept it as long as it was brought into town. Emma did not know what to say, considering that it was still a prohibited item. Colette wondered whether Cyril truly intended to make money that way. Cyril explained that it had become prohibited because of the ruler, but if there were genuinely people who needed it, he wanted to deliver it to them. Colette simply accepted that, stating that as long as Cyril was satisfied, she did not care about humans anyway. Cyril agreed but admitted that something still remained on his mind. Cyril noted that, as expected, no one had told him how dragon tier incense was actually made. Chris laughed loudly and told him not to worry. Seeing Chris grin, Cyril asked whether he knew something. Chris confirmed it, prompting Cyril to remark that Chris seemed to know everything and that he had somehow expected him to know. Chris began by explaining that the name dragon tier incense was merely camouflage. Cyril wondered whether that meant it had nothing to do with dragon's tears, and Chris confirmed that it did not. Even so, Chris explained that it undoubtedly had something to do with dragons, although the raw ingredients themselves were nothing special. He instructed Cyril to obtain a fruit called galleon. After Cyril repeated the unfamiliar name, Chris explained that he had seen it at the greengrocers in town and that it should be easy to acquire. Cyril agreed and decided to go take a look immediately. At the market, the vendor showed Cyril the galleon fruit. Cyril took one and remarked on its intriguing shape. The vendor explained that it was also known as cow's horn and instructed him to peel the shell before eating the inside. Cyril acknowledged the explanation and requested to buy all of them. The vendor remarked that Cyril was adventurous despite trying it for the first time, and Cyril thanked her. Before long, Cyril returned and announced that he had bought them. Chris confirmed that the fruit was indeed galleon. Since Louise was sleeping, Chris called over Colette and Emma and instructed them to swallow the fruit whole. Cyril asked whether they did not need to remove the shell, but Chris explained that peeling it was only how humans ate it. He then instructed Colette to store the fruit in her stomach after swallowing it, specifically in her first stomach, the one used for digestion. Cyril asked why Chris was not doing the same. Chris explained that he did not need to eat to sustain himself and therefore possessed no digestive functions. Colette huffed and called Chris useless, while Chris laughed and remarked that there was no need for her to be jealous. Cyril then asked what would happen after they swallowed the fruit. Chris answered that they would simply wait for 1 month. Emma reacted in shock at the mention of an entire month. Cyril asked whether they would then obtain dragon tier incense. Chris pointed out the fruit's thorns and explained that, to prevent them from stabbing the dragons, their stomachs would produce secretions that enclosed the galleon. Cyril compared it to pearls. Chris explained that once the secretion matured and changed in quality, it would harden and become dragon tier incense. Cyril understood but wondered whether it was truly that simple. Chris laughed loudly and called Cyril very silly. When Cyril asked why, Chris explained that while it might seem easy for him, ordinary dragon knights who could not communicate with their dragons would have no way to make the fruit remain inside a dragon's stomach for an entire month without it being thrown back up. Cyril realized that Chris was right. Chris added that the process was difficult for anyone except Cyril. Cyril finally understood. Turning to Colette and Emma, he apologized to them. Colette asked what he was apologizing for. Cyril explained that he felt sorry for making them swallow the fruit whole because it must be bad for their stomach. Emma assured him that she was fine and that it was no big deal. Colette declared that controlling her own stomachs was a simple task and questioned who he thought she was. Cyril remarked that it was impressive and thanked both dragons. Cyril then considered that there were probably many people who knew how to make dragon tier incense. He worried that if he, as a dragon knight, continued buying galleon fruit, people would eventually become suspicious. Chris agreed that such suspicion would naturally arise. Cyril concluded that it would be ideal if he could grow galleon himself. Chris laughed loudly and remarked that Cyril possessed the potential to become not only a dragon knight but also a remarkable merchant. Surprised, Cyril reacted to the comment. Chris explained that the idea was simple, saying that people made money at every stage, from producing raw materials to processing them and finally selling the finished product. Cyril understood and confirmed that handling every step himself would mean earning all the profit as well. Chris confirmed that this was exactly the case. He further explained that if Cyril depended on others for supplies and became trapped by price gouging, his livelihood would be controlled by them. Cyril agreed that Chris had a point, comparing it to a liquor store being unable to stock any liquor. Emma observed that while growing galleon themselves was a good idea, it would be a problem if someone happened to discover the plants. Cyril agreed that it would definitely be bad and concluded that, if he was going to do it, it would have to be done in secret. Colette added that he would also need land to grow the crop and questioned whether he could conceal such land. Cyril fell silent for a moment before admitting that it would be difficult for him, though he already had someone in mind who could accomplish it. The following day, Cyril went to the dragon market of Man-o-War. Entering one of the shops, he informed the merchant that he was looking for a gargoyle species and asked whether any were available. The merchant invited Cyril to follow him. They walked over to where a chained gargoyle rested. Cyril greeted the creature and introduced himself as Cyril, but the dragon responded only with silence. Chapter 16 began with Cyril meeting a new dragon. Cyril noted that it might surprise others to hear it, but he could understand the language of dragons. A small dragon stood on rough ground near stone walls. Cyril asked the creature to try speaking to him. The dragon simply replied with a quiet sound. Silence settled between Cyril and the small dragon. Cyril asked whether the dragon disliked talking, and the dragon answered that it did not like it. Cyril remarked that the child was quite reticent and decided that it was enough as long as they could understand each other. He then expressed his wish to take the dragon with him and asked what the creature thought. The dragon left the decision entirely to Cyril. Not long afterward, Cyril walked through the street with the dragon quietly following behind him. He decided that the dragon should have a name and asked whether there was one the creature preferred. The dragon continued walking without responding. Cyril called out again and asked whether the dragon had heard him. The dragon replied that he had not realized Cyril had been speaking to him and stated that he was listening now. Cyril observed that dragons usually did not have names anyway. The dragon answered that any name would be acceptable. Cyril suggested the name Jui and asked what the dragon thought. Jui continued walking beside him and responded with a faint sound. Watching the dragon, Cyril felt that he was beginning to understand the child. Although Jui's responses and reactions were subdued, Cyril concluded that they did not indicate refusal. He then told Jui that he would be counting on him from then on. Jui answered with another quiet sound. Cyril then mentioned that he had heard the gargoyle species possessed the ability to mimic their surroundings and asked how the ability worked. Jui replied that it was difficult to explain. Cyril said that even a rough explanation would be enough. After a brief silence, Jui explained that there were two kinds of abilities. Cyril asked about the first. Jui explained that he could disappear together with any living thing he was touching, causing both of them to vanish from sight. Cyril reacted with surprise, realizing that the dragon could disappear from view, and remarked that the ability was impressive. Jui added that they could still be heard if they made noise, but they would remain unseen as long as no one touched them. Cyril understood and commented that he appreciated how clearly defined the rules were. He then asked about the second ability. Jui explained that it affected the appearance of the surroundings, making them seem different. Cyril asked what that meant. After a moment of silence, Cyril admitted that he did not really understand the explanation and asked whether Jui would mind demonstrating it instead. Jui agreed without objection. Cyril accepted and noted that their companions were staying at the inn, deciding that the demonstration would take place there. When Cyril entered the inn, Louise welcomed him back. Louise and Colette looked at him in confusion, believing that he had gone to bring back a new child. Cyril became confused and pointed out that she was already there. The other dragons grew even more confused before admitting that Cyril was right. Emma apologized, explaining that she had not noticed the new dragon at all. Cyril wondered whether it was because Jui belonged to a small species that no one had noticed her. Chris laughed and explained that size was not the reason. He revealed that the three dragons had only seen Cyril, and that was what had actually happened. Although still confused, Cyril introduced Jui to the group and then introduced Louise, Colette, Emma, and Chris to Jui. The dragons quietly expressed that it was nice to meet Jui, while Jui replied only with a brief sound. Cyril then asked Jui whether she could demonstrate the other form of mimicry. Jui explained that she had already done so. Cyril reacted in confusion. Chris told him to look carefully and explained that the three dragons had seen only Cyril the entire time before asking Jui if that was correct. Jui quietly confirmed it. Cyril realized that this was the other mimicry. Jui explained that she could alter the impression others had of what they saw. They would still see the object itself, but the way they perceived it would be different. Cyril reflected on that explanation and used the example of a corpse lying by the roadside, wondering whether people could be made to perceive such a sight as perfectly normal. Jui confirmed that this was correct. Cyril remarked that the ability was amazing. He immediately realized that such a power would allow them to conceal the galleon field. As an aside, Chris commented that forming a contract with a gargoyle species would make things interesting. Cyril then turned to Jui and asked for her permission. Jui readily agreed. Cyril began explaining the contract, but Jui interrupted by agreeing again before he could continue. Cyril paused and asked whether she truly did not want an explanation, especially if she knew nothing about it. After a brief silence, Jui admitted that she did not dislike Cyril. Looking around at everyone, she observed that they all seemed to be enjoying themselves. Cyril thanked her. As their blood fell, light surrounded them, completing the contract. Afterward, Louise asked what kind of ability Cyril had obtained. Cyril explained that it was the power to alter appearances and remarked that it was certainly an interesting ability depending on how it was used. Chris suggested that Cyril should take the opportunity to change his own appearance. Confused, Cyril asked whether he was supposed to transform himself. Deciding to test the new ability, he prepared himself. As the light around him intensified, the ground began to tremble and a loud sound echoed through the area. The dragons watched in shock as they recognized the form of the Bahamut species. Transformed into the mighty Bahamut dragon, Cyril wondered why he had taken that form. Chris laughed heartily and explained that the ability transformed its user into the impression that those around them held. He added that the Bahamut was the Dragon King species, the dragon among dragons, and remarked that the form suited Cyril perfectly. Cyril, still in his Bahamut form, remained silent. A few days later, Cyril stood inside the Borussel town hall and explained that he planned to build a base in the suburbs. Rose reacted with surprise and wondered whether Cyril's guild had already grown so much. Cyril explained that it was not so much a matter of growth, but that he now had Chris, the phoenix species entrusted to him by the princess, and a total of 5 dragons. He added that things had started to feel cramped within the town. Rose agreed that he had a point. Cyril admitted that space had indeed become limited, but revealed that his real reason was that he wanted to grow galleons, making a larger plot of land necessary. Rose warned that it would cost a considerable amount and asked whether he was prepared for that expense, adding that the price would also depend on the size of the land. Cyril estimated that it should be large enough that even colossal dragons would not feel confined. Rose noted that such a property would be comparable in size to a military fort. She estimated that it would cost around 500,000 reals per year. Cyril reacted in surprise at the amount. Rose explained that all land within the country ultimately belonged to the king. Cyril concluded that the cost was far beyond what he could afford. Rose suggested asking the princess instead, pointing out that he was quite close to her. Cyril declined, thanked Rose, and said that he would find another way to earn the money. Privately, he reflected that although the princess had always been kind to him, he could never involve her in bootlegging. A while later, Cyril relayed the situation to the dragons. Louise concluded that obtaining a large piece of land was impossible for the time being. Colette asked whether they would have to settle for a home garden instead. Cyril confirmed that they would, explaining that it could not be helped. For the moment, he decided they would try growing galleon entirely on their own from beginning to end. Turning to Jui, he explained that he intended to grow the galleon outside and asked whether Jui could conceal it once it sprouted. Jui responded with a quiet sound. Chris then asked whether Cyril was certain that would be enough. Cyril replied that he was only treating it as an experiment. Chris suggested that, in that case, the galleon should be grown inside the dragon stable. Cyril reacted in confusion, pointing out that it would not receive any sunlight there. Chris laughed and assured him that this would not be a problem. He told Cyril to watch as a bright light began to radiate around him. Cyril trailed off as he stared at the glow. Chris explained that the flame of the phoenix was the flame of resuscitation, also known as the flame of life, and that it could easily make crops grow. Cyril reacted in surprise and wondered whether that was really possible. Chris added that the light would continue shining constantly, causing the plants to grow more quickly. Cyril again expressed his surprise at the idea that continuous light would accelerate their growth before pausing. He then asked whether producing a flame capable of growing crops was difficult for Chris. Chris laughed heartily, found the concern amusing, and told Cyril not to worry. He added that, in the past 3,000 years, Cyril was the only person who had ever worried about an immortal like him. Chris explained that maintaining such a flame was as effortless as sitting up straight. Cyril understood and concluded that Chris would be fine. He then entrusted the task to Chris, who answered with a firm sound. Cyril noted that by growing the galleon inside the stable while having Jui conceal it, their secret would remain undiscovered. Suddenly, a voice from outside called out, asking whether anyone was home. Cyril wondered who it could be. He stepped forward, answered that someone was there, and reacted in confusion before recognizing the princess. Surprised by her arrival, Cyril greeted her. He noticed that she appeared to have come in a hurry. After they went inside and the princess took a seat, Cyril asked whether she had come with another request. She remarked that he was being rather cold. Cyril reacted in confusion. The princess explained that an official from town had informed her that Cyril needed land for his guild's base. Cyril wondered whether Rose had contacted her. He admitted that he did need land but explained that he had not wanted to trouble the princess any further. The princess became upset and questioned why he felt that way. She explained that she possessed an abundance of unused land and could provide him with as much as he wanted. Cyril refused, insisting that he truly could not accept such an offer. The princess clenched her hands and declared that she was willing to do anything for Cyril because she wanted to be able to help him. Surprised by her determination, Cyril accepted her insistence. He thanked her and expressed his appreciation. The princess enthusiastically assured him that she would take care of everything. Chapter 17 began with a carriage rattling along the road. Cyril remarked that only 3 days had passed, yet the princess had already found a place for him. Believing it must have been difficult, he expressed his concern, but the princess explained that it had not been difficult at all. She said it was true that she possessed excess land and thanked him for worrying about her. She added, however, that the land could not be used immediately. A short time later, the princess announced that they had arrived. Looking outside, Cyril reacted with surprise at the vastness of the area. The princess asked what he thought of the place, explaining that it had been recorded as an abandoned manor. Cyril asked whether that meant it included fields as well. The princess confirmed that it did, although they were barren now. Cyril noticed that most of the buildings had also decayed, and the princess agreed. Even so, she explained that she had wanted to prepare a place that Cyril could use right away. Cyril thanked her for being such a great help. He observed that the existing watermills and bridges would provide useful references for arranging the facilities, making the task much easier than starting from nothing. Once again, he expressed his gratitude. The princess smiled, pleased that Cyril liked the place. A manor was essentially a village administered by royalty or nobility. Everything harvested there belonged to the ruling family or nobles, while the workers received wages in return, making it a place dedicated to growing crops. Cyril reflected that his true objective was to cultivate galleon, and that there was no better location for it than this manor. Cyril decided that the first step would be leveling the land. He planned to burn away anything unnecessary. As he released his power, loud sounds echoed through the area, startling the princess. Cyril explained that he had formed a contract with Emma, a Slavic species. The princess reacted with surprise upon learning that he had contracts with other dragons as well. Cyril remarked that the ashes would surely serve as fertilizer too. Noticing the princess's condition, he asked what was wrong. She caught her breath and insisted that it was nothing. Cyril pointed out that she did not look well. She quickly denied there being any serious problem, thanked him for his concern, and admitted that something had simply been on her mind. She confessed that she had wanted to join Cyril and had hoped to become a member of Dragon First, but had been forbidden because doing so would lower her social standing. Cyril acknowledged that the matter concerned her status. He reflected that the princess had always taken excellent care of him, yet he had done nothing for her in return. He asked her to remain still for a moment. Although surprised, the princess agreed. Cyril activated the ability he had obtained through his contract with Jui, explaining that it was used to alter a person's appearance. The princess was astonished by the transformation. Cyril explained that she could now join the guild while disguised as someone else. She realized that it was effectively an incognito identity, and Cyril agreed. He noted that he could no longer address her as Her Highness in that form. The princess then asked Cyril to choose a name for her. Surprised that she wanted him to decide, Cyril confirmed her request before suggesting the name Jean. She happily accepted it, saying it was wonderful and thanking him. Cyril then explained that, since she would be joining them, there was something important she needed to know. Jean wondered whether it was some kind of secret. Cyril revealed that he could understand the language of dragons and converse with them as naturally as with people. Jean reacted in amazement, shocked that such a thing was possible. Cyril laughed, admitting that he knew it was difficult to believe. Jean reflected that she had never heard of anyone possessing such an ability. Cyril then suggested putting it to the test. The scene shifted to Boisroussel, where Cyril and Jean returned. Louise welcomed them back, and Cyril greeted her in return. Jean asked what the test was supposed to prove. Cyril asked her to wait a moment before calling Louise over. He explained that the test would have Louise repeat what Jean had been muttering to herself while riding on Louise through the town. He believed this would prove that he truly understood the language of dragons. Cyril then asked Louise how it had gone and requested that she tell him what Jean had said. Louise fell silent. Cyril asked what was wrong. Louise apologized and admitted that she was unsure whether she should reveal it. Cyril asked what she meant. Louise explained that she thought it would be better for Cyril to hear it directly from Jean instead. Cyril turned to Jean and explained that Louise had said Jean had been muttering something that would not be appropriate for Louise to repeat. Jean looked confused, wondering what it could have been. Cyril asked whether she had been talking to herself while riding on Louise. Jean immediately froze and blushed. Panicking, she begged Louise not to tell Cyril. Louise explained that this was exactly why she had refused. Cyril laughed and reassured Jean that Louise had no intention of telling him. Jean stammered her thanks, and Cyril remarked that Louise had only suggested it would be better to hear it from Jean herself. Jean immediately rejected that idea as well. When Cyril asked why, Jean shook her head in embarrassment and explained that saying it herself would make it feel like a confession before hastily dismissing the idea. Jean then changed the subject and exclaimed that Cyril truly could understand the language of dragons. Cyril confirmed it. Jean remarked that it was amazing and realized that this was why the dragons trusted him so deeply. Cyril agreed, explaining that being able to understand them made it easy to ask for their help. Jean admitted that she had once believed Cyril had been speaking with the child of God, but she now realized that it had never been because of the child of God and had instead been the result of Cyril's own ability. As that realization settled in, she called out to him. Cyril asked what was wrong. Jean brought up his power and asked whether the members of his previous guild had known about it. After a brief pause, Cyril admitted that he had told them. Jean asked whether they had expelled him despite knowing, and Cyril confirmed that they had. Jean became dissatisfied and concluded that they had failed to recognize his worth. She added that although she had heard Lindworm was a first-class guild, its members were only superficial. Cyril thanked her and admitted that he was now grateful they had expelled him. Compared with people like them, he would rather remain with companions who acknowledged him. He then told Jean that he would be counting on her as a member of Dragon First from then on. Jean enthusiastically accepted. They shook hands and Jean looked forward to working together with him. 1 month later, Colette observed that everything was pretty much finished. Cyril agreed. Emma remarked that having such a large space as their base meant she could finally run to her heart's content. Louise added that it would be wonderful if they made a great bed there. Cyril reflected that once they truly began cultivating galleons, hiring constructors would become difficult, so they needed to have at least the essential facilities completed beforehand. Chris then called Colette and Emma forward and instructed them to show Cyril what they had. The two dragons answered affirmatively, stepped closer, and wiggled slightly. Curious, Cyril leaned in as they presented a basket. He reacted in surprise, stammering as he wondered what it contained, before realizing with delight that their very first dragon tier incense had finally been completed. It was done, their very first dragon tier incense. Louise was genuinely surprised that galleons truly turned out like that. Emma explained that it was made inside their own stomach. The princess had first joined Dragon while incognito, after proposing to become a member of the guild once they obtained a new base. Cyril then revealed his power to her after she became a member, and their friendship deepened. Cyril remarked that swallowing them whole must have been hard and thanked them. Its appearance was by no means inferior to theirs. Chris admitted that she did not know how an amateur's work would turn out, but she guaranteed its quality. The merchants in Man-O-War should know to some extent, and since Cyril was going to sell it anyway, he intended to have them examine it as well. Later, at Man-O-War, a man appeared and wondered who was there. He noticed Cyril and asked about his business that day. Cyril wanted him to look at something and called Colette. Colette understood, and together they showed the man the dragon tier incense, explaining that it was man-made. The man was amazed. Cyril explained that there were only a few of them, but if the man was going to buy them, Cyril planned to make them for real. The man understood and asked to see them. The prohibited dragon tier's incense could easily get through inspections via Jui's ability, but that would be meaningless if the quality was bad. The man sniffed it and was shocked, left speechless by what he sensed. He remarked that a person rarely came across dragon tier incense with such a high degree of purity and that there was nothing to complain about. Cyril and Colette smiled. The man then asked whether Cyril had really made them himself, and Cyril confirmed that he had. The man asked whether Cyril intended to sell them to him and wondered if Cyril could maintain that level of purity. He turned to Colette for confirmation and she agreed. Cyril determined that it should be all right. The man fell silent as he considered the matter. At that level of purity, he was willing to pay double to buy it. Cyril was shocked. The man explained that the higher the purity, the easier it was for people with a weak imagination to dream of what they wanted, so he intended to give it a decent value. He opened a cabinet and handed the money to Cyril. It was a church bill that could be exchanged for cash at any church, and the amount was $10,000 as an advance payment. Cyril agreed and smiled. After that, the man remarked that Dragon First was certainly at the center of attention with their promising growth and expressed his desire to become acquainted with Cyril. Cyril thanked him. The man pointed out that Cyril could not have come merely to greet him, and Cyril agreed. The man then wondered whether the item he had brought with him might interest Cyril. Cyril wondered what it was. The man took out a bag and presented it to Cyril. It contained a kind of holy relic. Cyril stared at the holy relic. The man explained that a holy relic was the relic of a saint or their remains, and that most of them were counterfeit. However, the one he had presented was genuine. He acknowledged that Cyril would naturally take such a claim with a grain of salt and encouraged him to have a look. A bone appeared. It was the bone of the Holy Dragon King, an existence that had ruled the dragons before they were exploited by humans. The man laughed. He believed that Cyril would achieve greater accomplishments in the future, but also considered the relic useful for increasing Cyril's prestige. In his view, holding a holy relic would be advisable. Cyril understood it as a way of being ostentatious, and the man agreed. Cyril considered how much money he could use at that moment. Someone suddenly laughed and indicated that they had come first. Chris appeared and called Cyril her friend, insisting that he should buy the relic and guaranteeing it herself. Cyril agreed and decided to buy it. He remained uncertain about what exactly Chris was guaranteeing and wondered whether the relic was worth using most of the money he had. Chris replied that it was not something as puny as the bone of the Holy Dragon King. Cyril was confused. Chris told Cyril to behold it, confirming that he was right. It had been made from the remains left behind when Chris had died several times before. Humans had even called it a sacred tool. Cyril wondered what sacred tools were, and Chris explained that they were said to be tools used by gods. He understood that he certainly would not obtain something like this so easily. Chris attributed it to his fame, which must have called for it as expected. Since Chris had said so, Cyril accepted that it had to be real and wondered what kind of effects it had. Chris explained that it was a splendid thing that would make humans weep with joy. She instructed Cyril to grind it and take it into his body. Cyril wondered if she wanted him to eat it and what would happen if he did. Chris explained that it could cancel out one death for him. Cyril was surprised and pointed out that even Chris did not need it. Louise, Colette, Emma, and Jui needed it instead. He realized that he was the only one who had 4 of them. Chris laughed. Cyril told Chris to keep her tone down. Chris was very happy, thinking that he would prioritize dragons even when it came to life and death. She had not expected any human to be capable of that before immortality. Cyril thought that Chris had encountered all kinds of humans. Chris then said that in return for amusing her, she would fulfill his willfulness and told him not to worry. Chris cut off her hand. Cyril was shocked, but Chris did not even consider it an injury. A new hand appeared again, leaving Cyril amazed. Chris had him come over and hand her the knife. She began glowing intensely. Cyril was confused as Chris explained that she had added even more power into the horn and that he could call it the real phoenix horn. Cyril wondered what she meant. Chris said that with just one more step, they would head to their half-finished base. Later, Cyril wondered what Chris intended to do with it. Chris determined that the center should be around there and ordered the stone to thrust into their base. Cyril inserted it into the floor. It glowed and an enormous pillar appeared. Chris told Cyril that his wish had come true. As long as his dragons were in the base, they would not die, and he should tell them to hide there whenever it became dangerous for them. Cyril thought that it felt unreal, but he could sense that the pillar possessed the power to do that simply by looking at it. It was truly amazing, and he thanked Chris. She told him that he should rely on her more and laugh. Even in an emergency, the dragons would be fine as long as they remained there. That meant no one would die in the base. The new base he had acquired and the power that came with it would help his dragons, himself, and Dragon First make great leaps forward. After that, someone announced that it was finally finished. Cyril explained that only the dragon stable and his house had been completed and that they were now done moving from Boisrucel. The name of the new base was Partholon. Dragons appeared. Jean called Cyril's attention to the fact that his house seemed rather simple compared to the dragon stable. Cyril agreed and explained that the Dragon Knight Guild could not function without any dragons. The simpler house was also simply because he had not had enough budget, so he had been forced to cut some costs there. Jean wondered if that was why he had prioritized the dragon stable and was impressed. Cyril explained that he planned to expand it after saving enough money, but there were other places he wanted to improve as well, so the expansion would have to wait. Someone called Cyril. Emma informed him that he had a visitor waiting at the main entrance. A man appeared and introduced himself as Rose's messenger. Rose wanted Cyril to come to the town hall at once. Cyril wondered what had happened for her to send a messenger. The messenger admitted that he was not sure about the details either. Cyril wondered if something bad had happened, while Jean wondered if it could be an incident. She pleaded to accompany Cyril, and he agreed. Rose probably would not notice that it was Jean in this form. Rose appeared and apologized for calling Cyril so hurriedly. She was confused by the girl beside him and asked who she was. Cyril explained that Jean was a new member of his guild and introduced her. Jean greeted Rose. Rose wondered if Cyril had caught a noblewoman from somewhere. Jean was surprised. Rose remarked that Jean's manners were very elegant and wondered whether she was the daughter of a merchant or a declining aristocrat. She felt that she had seen Jean somewhere before. Cyril and Jean were speechless. Cyril thought that Rose was sharp. Cyril asked whether something had happened. Rose explained that she needed him to do something related to cleaning up someone's mess and asked whether it was all right. Lindworm had made a blunder. Cyril was shocked and asked what they had screwed up. Rose explained that a major accident had occurred at a dragon ranch. All the staff had managed to escape, but the dragons were still there. Jean and Cyril were worried. Rose said that it would be too cruel to abandon the dragons to their fate, so a rescue request had been sent to Lindworm, but they had messed up. Cyril realized that it was his turn this time. Suddenly, someone entered the room. Two men appeared, Eric and Louis. Eric was the captain of the 3rd Squad of Lindworm and an executive-level member. Eric noticed a face he had not seen for some time and became angry, demanding an explanation from Rose about what she meant by dropping them. Eric believed that Rose would talk to them later. He explained that they had accepted the request and that if it were taken away before they could talk it through, they would lose face. Cyril remained quiet. Rose asked what Eric wanted her to do and told him about the official document. Cyril called out to her and stated that he would set out right away. He would make the preparations, while she should send the destination and details to his place. Rose agreed. Louis objected to Cyril doing as he pleased. Cyril replied that Louis could take his time discussing how to save face. Louis shouted about Cyril's attitude. Cyril reminded him that the lives of dragons were on the line, apologized, and said that he would be taking his leave first. Louis insisted that he was not done and grabbed Cyril by the shoulder. Suddenly, a fire appeared and Louise was attacked. Louis wondered what it was, while Eric asked Cyril when he had acquired such power. Cyril remained silent as he left. After that, Cyril decided to have Emma and Jui come with him. They might have to fight, and he told Louise that he was counting on her. She replied that she would work hard. Colette wondered what she would do, and Cyril explained that they would mainly be rescuing and battling this time, making combat her strong suit. It was also important to protect their home. Colette agreed. Cyril then asked Colette if she could alternatively help him with some preparations before they set out. He told Jean to go with Colette, and Jean asked Colette to come. Cyril also explained that Chris would stay there. Chris was his trump card, so he wanted her to protect their important base. Chris laughed and accepted that she could not help but agree. Cyril told Louise that she could keep sleeping as well, since they might need her somewhere. Louise understood. Cyril called Jui and said that he wanted to confirm something regarding her mimicry. Considering the possibility of infiltrating their destination, he wondered whether she could make it so that other people could not perceive them. Jui explained that she could not do that for humans but she could for dragons. Cyril wondered whether he could mimic the wall. Jui said that she would try. Cyril vanished. Chris observed that he had effectively become invisible. He moved and Chris could now see him when he moved. Cyril wondered whether it was possible to adjust the mimicry after he moved. Jui said that she could, though it might make her tired. Cyril smiled, patted Jui's head, and told her there was no point in forcing it. He said that he was counting on Jui when the time came. Jui agreed. 1 hour later, Colette asked whether it was enough. Cyril said yes and thanked Colette and Jean. A large amount of food appeared, and there was so much of it after everything had been laid out that Cyril felt as though he could host a banquet. Jean wondered what he planned to do with it all. Cyril explained that he was going to eat it. Jean was shocked that he intended to eat everything by himself. Cyril explained that the ability he had gained from contracting with Colette allowed him to store the energy he obtained from eating. Jean understood. She called Cyril's attention to the amount of strength he was preparing to deal with this request and wondered whether he considered that much necessary. Cyril confirmed that he did. He believed they were going to get into a fight and cheered for them. 3 dragons watched Cyril eat. Emma realized that Cyril appeared to be in pain. Eating that much was not only painful for him, but would also make him sick of the food. They could not help him either. Jui remained silent, thinking that Cyril was a strange person. He told them not to force themselves, yet he was forcing himself. Emma called their attention and told them that they should work hard. She would not forgive them if they messed up. Jui and Colette agreed. Colette said that she had given it her all for Cyril, even if it cost her life. Jui also said that she would do whatever she could. Chris laughed. She thought that Cyril was suited to be a leader, as he took the lead and raised the motivation of his friends. Chris called Cyril and explained that she would not be going this time, so she would give him something as a parting gift. Cyril was surprised. Following that, as they walked, Emma wondered how long it would take to reach the ranch where the accident had occurred. Cyril had a map and determined that after they turned before the Eclipse River, it would take around half a day to reach the foot of Mount Nureyev. Emma wondered whether it would be better to head straight instead of turning. Cyril explained that there were only grasslands in that direction, so traveling on foot would take him longer. Emma thought that was all the more reason for him to ride on her back. She had noticed that he had started to become out of breath a while ago and urged him not to overwork himself. Cyril thanked her but explained that he was fine with something like that. Emma was not cut out for carrying things, so she would become exhausted if he rode on her. Emma thought that might be true. She wondered whether Louise should have come with them. Even if Louise became sleepy along the way, she would follow as long as Cyril ordered her. Cyril called Emma's attention, and his thoughts turned to the color of obedience. He disliked it. Although he could use the power of dragon tools to force dragons to do what he ordered, he would never use something like that. Emma understood that it was an urgent situation, but Cyril remained unwilling to use such a method. He apologized for being stubborn. Emma assured him that she understood and knew that he was being considerate of them. His stubbornness was somewhat different from that of normal people. She felt that there was a term for people like him. Jui thought of the term artisan, and Emma confirmed that she was correct. It referred to people who were particular about something while also being strict with themselves. Cyril thanked her. He had been thinking of taking a break, but he still felt capable of continuing. While they were walking, Jui noticed something and told Cyril to stop. Cyril was confused and ran ahead, but Emma stopped him. Cyril then noticed what Jui had seen. Louis appeared. Cyril wondered what Louis was up to. Louis warned Cyril not to play dumb, explaining that it would cause trouble if Cyril went there. Cyril wondered whether Louis was serious. Louis insisted that the face of Lindworm was on the line. Cyril accepted that point and assumed that Lindworm was now moving to settle the situation. Louis told him that he was in no position to concern himself with something like that. Emma thought that they were still the same terrible guild as ever. Cyril told Louis not to worry and stated that they would definitely save the dragons in the ranch. Louis ordered the dragons to get Cyril. Cyril wondered how they could get past them without injuring them. 3 dragons did not move. Louis wondered what was wrong and ordered them to attack Cyril. Michelle asked Emma whether Cyril could be trusted. Emma confirmed that he could and wondered whether Michelle did not know Cyril. Michelle admitted that she had never met him. Emma explained that Cyril was the human she trusted the most. Michelle then agreed that they could pass. Another dragon revealed that she did not want to do what Louis said. More than that, they also wanted to go with Emma and Cyril. Nonetheless, doing so would cause too much trouble, so they decided to stop Louis there. Cyril thanked them and expressed how much he appreciated it. He called Emma and Jui. Louis became angry and demanded to know what the 3 dragons were doing. He called them nothing more than tools and became enraged that they dared to look down on him. Louis said something that shocked the dragons. They were hurt and turned toward Cyril. Emma noticed the collar of obedience. Cyril angrily called Louis's attention. Louis ordered the dragons to attack Cyril, and Cyril dodged them. Louis shouted that Cyril was not getting away and called the dragons. The dragons attacked Cyril. Emma called Cyril and urged him to attack them, explaining that they were not that fragile. Cyril realized she was right. Slavic dragons were sturdy. Emma told him to fight with the intent of making them faint, since otherwise even moving would be painful for them. Cyril thought that might be the best method. Cyril called Jui and instructed her to hide him with all her power, including herself. The dragons appeared and Cyril vanished. Louis was confused and wondered where Cyril had gone. Cyril was standing right beside him. The dragons stared at him. The Slavic dragons seemed to know where he was, but as long as Louis was the one commanding them, they could not attack him. The collar of obedience suddenly burned. Louis wondered why it was burning. Cyril attacked Louis from behind, causing him to fall. Cyril told Jui that it was alright now and asked whether the 3 dragons were okay. They confirmed that they were. Michelle explained that because Louis had used the collar of obedience at full power, they would be unable to move properly for a while. The dragon thanked Cyril. Emma was angry at Louis, but Cyril stopped her. He told her that using her power on someone like Louis would be unwise, and that she should save it until they rescued the dragons. Emma noticed that Cyril had also just struck Louis's vital point. The dragons looked at them. Michelle was envious of Emma, thinking that she seemed to have found herself a good master. The dragons were worried, but Emma assured them that Cyril was the best master. Meanwhile, Colette was worried. Chris laughed and told her not to worry. Louise asked Chris about what she had given Cyril. Chris explained that it was her horn, the phoenix horn. Colette was confused. Chris stated that she would not allow Cyril to die a foolish death while she was present. She wondered how and in what situation Cyril would end up using it. Emma asked Cyril whether they had reached the correct place. He confirmed that they had and that it was supposed to be the ranch. They looked upon an abandoned place. Emma thought it was as if it were a prison. At least the place where she had been raised had been surrounded by broad grassland. She had been raised in the store, so she was not sure, but the place did not look normal. Cyril explained that nothing would start if they did not go inside. He instructed Emma and Jui to try to stay close to him. Emma noticed traces indicating that many dragons had rampaged through the area. Cyril wondered whether she could tell. Emma pointed out the claw marks on the wall, the way the building across had been burned, and the chewed-up hole in the ceiling. She believed that they had all been caused by different dragon. There were at least 6 kinds of dragons there. Cyril told them to proceed cautiously. He thought that if they faced that many dragons, their lives would be in danger. Emma suddenly looked surprised after seeing something. Cyril was confused. 2 massive dragons appeared and roared. Jui identified them as a chimera. A chimera was a synthetic beast patched together with bits and pieces of different dragons. The fact that one was here meant that this ranch had something to do with it. The chimeras looked at Cyril and roared, shocking them. Cyril shouted for everyone to dodge as the chimeras blasted fire. Jui was hit by the flames and Cyril became worried. The chimeras prepared to breathe fire again, but Emma called Cyril's attention. He also used fire to attack the chimeras and told Jui to hide them. They vanished, causing the chimeras to stop. Cyril then told them to retreat first. Emma wondered why such a chimera was there. Cyril had no idea, but he thought that it might be the answer. They decided to explore the area. Cyril realized that it was not that there were 6 kinds of dragons there. Rather, there was one dragon made from 6 dragons. Emma agreed that those had all been made by the chimera and that this was probably the case. Emma stared at the chimeras while Jui wondered what Cyril planned to do. Cyril explained that they had come to save the dragons, but it would be great if he could talk to them. Emma wondered whether that was possible. Cyril intended to try his best. He told them to stay away while he approached the chimeras by himself. Emma thought it was dangerous, but Cyril believed it should be fine if he was only trying to talk to them. He asked them to help him if he had to escape. Emma would attack a different spot when he signaled her, distracting the chimeras, while he counted on Jui's mimicry. Emma urged him to be careful. Cyril approached the chimeras and tried to determine whether they could hear him. The chimeras roared and attacked him. Cyril urged them to hear him out and wondered whether they could hear his voice. He asked them to give him some kind of reply, but realized that his voice did not seem to be getting through. Usually, he would hear dragons as words, but he could not understand them. That meant they were already no longer dragons. Cyril wondered what exactly they thought life was. Suddenly, someone spoke. Cyril was confused. The chimera asked him to kill them. Cyril realized that it was their voice. The chimeras continued asking him to kill them, and Cyril wondered why. They explained that it was painful and tormenting, and that they wanted to die. Cyril realized that they were mostly out of their minds. The chimeras wanted to be killed, leaving Cyril with no choice but to do it. Cyril apologized to them, then ran forward and attacked. He decided to take a chance and do it with everything he had. The chimeras were engulfed in fire. They glowed and thanked Cyril. One of the chimeras said that it could finally die. Cyril looked at them and realized that the core was there. He ran forward and handed over the phoenix horn. The place exploded. Later, something was revealed. A dragon appeared and wondered why she was alive. Cyril looked at the dragon and realized that it seemed he had won the bet. The dragon was injured and collapsed. Emma worried about her condition, and Cyril approached to check on her. He confirmed that the dragon was fine, with stable breathing and no sign of further trouble. Emma was relieved that she was alive. The phoenix horn had proven miraculous. Cyril had thought there was no other way but to free the souls of the chimera. He had not been certain whether they could resurrect, but he was glad that it had succeeded. Jui wondered what species the child had become. Cyril realized that he had never seen such a species before. Emma also had no knowledge of anything like it. Cyril recalled that when they had been chimeras, he could recognize their individual body parts. That meant they should have been composed of different dragon species, yet this dragon was different. Emma thought the dragon looked normal compared with her appearance as a chimera and wondered what they should do. Cyril concluded that they could not help the situation and decided to keep the dragon's existence a secret. He called Jui over and asked her to place a mimicry on the dragon whenever other people were nearby. Jui wondered whether it would make the dragon resemble a familiar species. Cyril confirmed that it would and praised Jui while patting her head. Jui explained that she had realized this after the large chimera disappeared. There were still other dragons farther away, and they might be weak. Cyril immediately decided that they should head there. Later, Rose reported that 31 dragons had been rescued. Cyril explained that, unfortunately, some had been beyond help, so he had cremated them there. Rose thanked him and expressed her appreciation for his efforts. She left the rescued dragons with the town's dragon doctor and said that they would take over from there. She also acknowledged that he had done a good job rescuing them. Cyril admitted that he had only managed to save about half of them, but Rose pointed out that he had nevertheless saved them. Lindworm had failed despite sending a squad, while he had managed to complete the rescue alone. Cyril thought about Lindworm as Rose remarked that they seemed likely to nag him about it for some time. He accepted that because they were essentially already quarreling. Rose wondered about that, then decided that she would deal with them herself and asked him to tell her if they made any unreasonable accusations. Cyril thanked her. Rose then mentioned that she wondered whether there was something concerning him. Cyril believed that Rose was aware of the matter. It would be bad if what had happened at that ranch came to light. He admitted that it was concerning him and explained that he had subjugated it. It had been difficult to deal with, and he had been unable to hold back, burning it until nothing remained. Rose understood the situation. Cyril added that, if he were to judge it himself, it probably would not be able to resurrect unless resurrection magic was used. He thought that much should be safe to say. Rose understood and apologized for making him do that to a dragon. Cyril reminded her that she should not forget to remunerate him. Rose agreed and thanked him. After that, Cyril revealed that he had brought a new child. Chris laughed and was glad that Bitsy had made it. She considered it a wise decision. Bitsy had been a former synthetic dragon, and if Cyril had genuinely handed her over, they would have disposed of her to destroy the evidence. Cyril realized that. Chris explained that humans did not seem to change even after several centuries, yet research into synthetic dragons was still ongoing. Cyril wondered whether they had been conducting that research for such a long time. Chris confirmed that they had, explaining that they had been putting together bits and pieces through hybridization, though neither approach was going well. She found Bitsy interesting. Cyril remained confused until Chris explained that Bitsy was a species even she did not recognize. If even Chris did not know what she was, Cyril could assume that she was a completely new species. Chris believed that Bitsy was close to what humans were trying to achieve through hybridization. Cyril wondered how such a thing had happened. Chris theorized that when Cyril had used her bone on the defeated synthetic dragon, the 7 kinds of souls had become one and been reborn. Cyril questioned whether such a thing was even possible. Chris clarified that it was only her conjecture. She laughed and pointed out that it was her horn, so it was not strange for it to cause such a miracle. Cyril acknowledged that Chris had a point and wondered what they should do now. Bitsy was surprised by what was happening. Cyril reassured her that everything was all right and that he would protect her, so she had no reason to worry. Bitsy remained confused and doubtful, recalling whether he would do awful things to her. She did not really remember, only that it had been tough and painful. Cyril promised that he would not do anything like that. He realized that Bitsy had definitely experienced a great deal on the ranch. Bitsy believed him, and Cyril reaffirmed that he absolutely meant it. He patted her head, making her smile with relief. Cyril explained that Bitsy would have to stay in the guild from then on, so he decided that she needed a name. Bitsy became excited and agreed. After considering a name, he named her Chanel and welcomed her. Chanel was happy and returned the greeting. Chris reassured Chanel that she could rest assured and told her that she should form a contract with Cyril. Chanel wondered why, and Chris explained with a smile that doing so would make her even more attached. Cyril thought that might indeed be the case. Chris instructed Chanel to place a drop of blood on the magic circle, and they agreed. Something began to glow and shine. Cyril realized that it was a skill. Chris wondered how it was, and the new power granted by their contract became apparent. Cyril quietly urged himself to transform. Chanel was shocked when he suddenly transformed into a dragon form. Chris laughed as Chanel reacted to the sight of him becoming a completely different person. Chris explained that he seemed to have undergone a dragon transformation. Cyril wondered what that meant, and Chris explained that it was a child between a dragon and a human. Cyril realized that because his contract was with Chanel, he had become something like a chimera. Chanel was shocked by the revelation. Cyril considered his human form and his dragonoid form. It seemed that he could freely change between the two. He then wondered what kind of power this form possessed. Later on, Cyril was surprised when Chanel noticed that he had returned to his previous form. Chris asked what was wrong, and Cyril realized that he had run out of energy. Chris laughed, noting that it had not been long and that the transformation must have been quite draining. Although they wanted to confirm his new ability, Cyril could not continue in his current state and decided to go grocery shopping instead. Chris agreed, then suddenly flew off and told him to wait a moment. Cyril was confused until Chris returned with a wild ox. She explained that it should be enough for the time being, at least in terms of quantity. Chanel stared at Cyril as he ate the entire wild ox. She was amazed by how much he had eaten. Cyril wondered if he had surprised her and reminded her of how they had formed their contract. He had also formed contracts with other dragons. Chanel realized that he had many dragons, and Cyril explained that this was why he could do so many things. He told her that his dragons would be returning soon and that they would need to introduce her to the others. Chanel looked forward to meeting them. Before that, Cyril decided that they needed to confirm the skill. He transformed into his dragon form, and Chanel realized that he had changed again. Cyril noticed that his physical abilities seemed to have increased. Chris suggested that he attack her to test them. Cyril was confused and made sure she was certain. Chris laughed and explained that she was immortal, comparing an attack against her to whipping the surface of a lake. She assured him that he should not hold back. Cyril appreciated her willingness and told Chanel to watch from afar. Chanel agreed. Cyril attacked Chris without hesitation. He punched her and continued attacking, then ran toward her and launched another attack. The two fought as Cyril continued punching Chris. She acknowledged that his power was not bad and that her regeneration could not keep up with his attacks. Chris asked whether he could continue and Cyril agreed. Later, Cyril returned to his human form after running out of energy. Chris concluded that an entire ox could not even fuel him for 1 minute, making it the worst energy efficiency she had ever seen. Despite that, the power Cyril had displayed was astonishing. Since he had been able to overwhelm her in that state, it was safe to say that he was the strongest human while in his dragonoid form. Cyril decided that it would serve as his trump card in times of emergency. He called Chanel over, praised the power as amazing, and thanked her. Chanel became dizzy, unable to keep her eyes up with the speed of the battle. Chris found it amusing that the owner of such power could be so adorable and laughed. A few days later, Jean appeared looking dazed. She regarded Cyril as gallant and divine. Cyril recalled that they had come to the town to look for a weapon while he was in his dragonoid form. During their conversation, he had briefly shown her his transformed appearance, but she had remained in that state ever since. Jean considered it truly marvelous that he had obtained such power and regarded him as the Dragon Knight among Dragon Knights. Cyril thanked her. Looking back, Cyril could only talk to dragons in the beginning, yet now he could even change his form to resemble a dragon. He sighed, leaving Jean confused. He explained that he had to eat a great deal if he wanted to properly store energy, and his food expenses alone were 3 times those of everyone else. Jean was confused by what he meant. Cyril added that, although it might sound like a humble brag, repeatedly eating the same thing could eventually make him grow tired of it. Jean suggested hiring a cook and offered to introduce one to him. Cyril decided to pass on the offer. If he was going to let someone join them like Jean had, he wanted to confirm with his own eyes that the person was someone he could trust. He wanted someone like that. Jean was surprised and turned her back to Cyril, looking happy that she was someone he trusted. Cyril wondered whether he had made her angry by refusing so straightforwardly. Jean said that she was looking forward to it, leaving him confused. She repeated that she was looking forward to it, and Cyril resolved to try his best. He thought Jean must really like his dragonoid form. Suddenly, 2 men approached them. One of the men thought that this should have been a simple killing, but there was actually a bonus involved. Jean was shocked, while Cyril asked who they were. The man explained that they were nameless thugs from the area, degenerates who would do anything as long as they were paid. Cyril recognized their actions as the work of someone who thought poorly of him and wondered who was behind it. The men laughed, and one wondered whether Cyril had caused too much trouble for his old nest. Cyril realized that Lindworm was behind it. The man told him that he could resent them all he wanted in the other world, along with his own carelessness for not bringing his dragons. Cyril understood that they had been lying in wait for this moment. Jean called out to Cyril in concern. He reassured her that there was nothing to worry about and that all he needed to do was transform. Jean worried about the energy consumption, but Cyril smiled and transformed. He assured her that he did not even need a second to deal with them. Afterward, Jean looked happy as Cyril returned to his human form. She cheered for him before turning her attention to the thugs and wondering what should be done with them. She considered whether they should be arrested and punished, noting that they would certainly be hanged if she testified. Cyril refused and realized once again that Jean was a princess after all, but there had been no damage. Jean could not forgive an act of violence intended to take his life, and Cyril could tell that she was fuming. Cyril considered that these people made their living this way and decided that they should deal with them accordingly. Jean pointed out that they had Louise, who could carry the thugs to the town hall. Cyril noticed something and asked her to wait. Before that, there was something he wanted to try. They went to a guild, and Jean recognized it as the Lindworm Guild, Cyril's old nest. They had been messing with him, and this time they had involved Jean as well. Cyril decided that it was about time they put an end to it. Inside the Lindworm Guild, Cyril entered and soon noticed Louis. He called out to him, and Louis was surprised to see him there. Louis asked what he was doing in the guild, but Cyril thought Louis looked extremely guilty. He told Louis that they needed to talk and that he wanted someone in charge brought to them. Louis insisted that he had nothing to say. A girl appeared and made it clear that it was time to tell the truth. She still believed that facts were facts and that they should be made public. Cyril realized that the person standing before him was no longer Jean as he knew her, but Her Royal Highness the Princess. Louis became frightened as he realized what the truth was. Jean confirmed it. Everything she had seen and heard, she intended to speak about openly without hiding anything. Louis was shocked and became completely speechless. Cyril guessed that the situation was too much for Louis to explain himself. He pointed out that Louis seemed unwilling even to listen to what Her Highness had to say and apologized for the situation. He then asked Jean whether she would be willing to accompany him to the government office. Jean agreed, considering the revelation of the truth more important. Cyril reflected that things were proceeding just as they had planned, although if he had not stopped Jean, she would have seriously exposed everything. Louis attempted to speak, but Cyril gave him one last chance. If no one in charge appeared, Cyril intended to leave. Louis asked him to wait a moment. Inside the office, a man apologized for keeping them waiting. He was Pascal, the deputy guild master of Lindworm. Cyril had not expected the oldest member of the guild to appear. Pascal explained that he could not afford to disrespect Her Highness. Jean questioned whether what had happened so far had not already been disrespectful. Pascal deeply apologized and admitted that he should have informed everyone the moment Her Highness arrived. He sincerely apologized on behalf of the guild for the offense against her. Cyril and Jean remained silent. Pascal explained that after putting pressure on Louis, it appeared to be true that Louis had arranged for Cyril to be attacked. Cyril asked whether Pascal would admit to it. Pascal apologized sincerely and stated that Louis would receive appropriate punishment. Cyril refused that course of action, leaving Pascal confused. He explained that Louis hiring thugs to attack him was not the important part. The real problem was that Her Highness had been present when it happened. Cyril turned to Jean and asked what the thugs had said when they saw her. Jean recalled that they had considered her a good catch and regarded Cyril as an additional bonus. Cyril explained that the thugs had attempted to defile Jean. Pascal argued that it had happened by chance because the men had not known who she really was. Cyril pointed out that this did not make their crime any less serious. If the story became public, Pascal would understand the consequences. Pascal realized the gravity of the situation. If the matter reached Jean's father, the king, Lindworm, would be in serious trouble. Pascal was left wondering what he should do. Cyril explained that it was an assault case and that, if they reached a settlement, the matter would be over. Pascal asked them to wait a moment and wondered whether they would be willing to forgive Louis in exchange for $100,000. Jean asked Cyril whether that was acceptable, and he agreed. The settlement was accepted. Cyril thought it should serve as a good lesson for those men. Jean fell silent, prompting Cyril to ask what was wrong. She apologized and explained that she had just remembered something urgent. Cyril wondered what could be so urgent. Jean asked whether she could leave, and Cyril gave her permission to go ahead, assuming that she probably had official duties to attend to. He offered to help if she needed anything. Jean thanked him but assured him that it was nothing serious and that she would be fine. Cyril accepted that and told her they would see each other again. He then remembered that he still had to report the thugs to the government office. On the way, Cyril noticed the Dragon Gear shop. The next day, construction was finished. Cyril praised the workers for doing a good job. The dragons appeared and asked whether everything was ready, and Cyril invited them inside. Emma wondered what kind of construction it had been and what the people had been carrying earlier. Cyril decided that it would be faster for her to experience it herself. Chris laughed and volunteered to be the first one inside. Emma protested that it was not fair and wished Colette were there for this. Emma entered and became confused, sensing that something was different. Louise admitted that she did not really understand it either. Emma found the place extremely comfortable, leaving Louise wondering what she meant. They soon realized that the difference was the soil. It really was different. Cyril explained that he had replaced the soil in the dragon stable with a type called bluegrass. Emma was shocked that he had used bluegrass. Louise asked whether Emma knew about it, and Emma confirmed that she did. Among the soils used for dragon stable floors, bluegrass was the most expensive. She wondered whether Cyril had used it throughout the entire stable. He confirmed that he had. Emma was shocked, while Louise wondered whether it was really that expensive. Cyril explained that it cost roughly $20,000. Louise was astonished that he had gone all out for what was essentially dirt. Cyril explained that the stable was where everyone wanted to spend most of their day, so he wanted to make it a comfortable space regardless of the cost. Chris admitted that she did not quite understand it, but she was sure that it helped with fatigue recovery. She also realized that it was not only the soil that had changed and wondered whether Cyril remained as sharp as ever. Cyril pointed toward a crystal. It was a styre which maintained the ideal atmospheric mana inside the stable. Both dragons understood its purpose. Chris explained that it matched the mana density from the time dragons were born and acknowledged that humans had done quite well. Emma realized that it must also have been incredibly expensive. Cyril revealed that it had cost $80,000. Louise was surprised by the price. Cyril explained that he had come into some easy money and had finally done what he had always intended to do. Emma was genuinely happy and Louise thanked him. Cyril thought that he could not really feel the difference himself, but the money seemed to have been completely worth it. Suddenly, someone praised Cyril as being even more amazing than she had heard and recognized that this was simply the kind of person he was. Cyril turned and saw Jean accompanied by a noblewoman. He apologized and greeted them. Jean assured him that everything was all right before introducing her companion as Countess Gerard. Cyril was shocked and introduced himself as Cyril Larose. The Countess introduced herself as Clara Gerard and expressed her pleasure at meeting him. Cyril remained confused. Jean explained that she had helped Clara realize something, leaving Cyril wondering what she meant. Clara explained that she had done business with Lindworm for many years. Cyril understood that many nobles were under contract with the Dragon Knight Guild, making those contracts a major source of income for the guild. Clara revealed that Jean had told her that Lindworm was a horrible guild, which had caused her to question whether she should continue dealing with such a place. She asked Cyril about the dragons first and wanted him to tell her more about them. Cyril was surprised that Clara was switching sides and realized that she was considering shifting the Countess's business away from Lindworm. Jean admitted that she was angry and had no intention of forgiving Lindworm over something so minor. Cyril realized that Jean's urgent errand from the previous day had been related to this. She intended to weaken Lindworm, and she had enough power and initiative to move even a countess away from the guild with ease. Cyril noticed Jean's smile and concluded that she was someone he absolutely did not want to make an enemy of. Cyril asked what kind of dealing she had with Lindworm, hoping it was something he could help with. Jean looked at him and whispered for him to rest assured. If it was Cyril, there was nothing to worry about. She had chosen someone who could definitely deal a blow to those people. Cyril hoped he was not being overestimated. There was no way they could match Lindworm's organizational power, after all. He asked if he could hear Clara's story. She agreed, but before that, she asked him to take a look at her child. She had brought the child with her, so they walked around. Cyril was surprised when a dragon appeared. Chris saw it and identified it as a laden species, a rare one. Cyril already knew of the laden species. Clara noticed that he was familiar with it and confirmed that he was absolutely right. The laden species was not particularly powerful among dragons, but it possessed a beauty that no other species could match. Cyril noticed the chain around the dragon's feet. Clara asked what he thought of her child. He found her extremely beautiful. Clara explained that the dragon was the pride of their household. Cyril wondered about their household, and Jean explained that nobles often kept laden species dragons. There was even a trend of viewing the beauty of the laden species as a symbol of a family's power. Cyril thought it must cost a fortune to maintain such a level of beauty. Chris laughed, and Cyril found the trend amusing. It was typical of a culture that had reached full maturity and was beginning to decay. Clara explained that until then, they had Lindworm handle the dragon's care and maintenance. She asked whether Cyril could take over that role. Cyril considered the matter and realized that if it was simply maintenance, he could definitely handle it. He asked if he could touch the dragon for a bit, and Clara agreed. Cyril walked toward the dragon and introduced himself before asking for her name. She answered that a vase had no name. Cyril thought that was rather sad. The dragon was confused. He explained that for her to say something like that so plainly, it must have been because of her circumstances. The dragon asked whether he could understand her. Chris explained that Cyril was her dearest friend, a rare kind among humans, and truly a fine man. The dragon realized that there were humans like that out there. Cyril wondered whether it would be all right for him to take over caring for her. The dragon wondered why he was asking. Cyril figured that Lindworm treated her as something special too. She explained that it did not matter because, in the end, she was just a chained bird in a cage. Cyril asked whether she did not want to be chained. She explained that they were a powerless species and had no way to survive without being bound. Cyril fell silent. The dragon explained that not even a large-class species could break the bindings, which were infused with magic as well. They were certainly powerful, but she had already given up. Cyril suddenly transformed. Clara and Jean were confused. He removed the chains from the dragon. Clara wondered what he was doing, while Jean urged her to try trusting him. Cyril told the dragon that she could move freely and that, if there was something she wanted to do, she should go for it. The dragon was surprised before suddenly flying around. They were all amazed. The dragon eventually descended and told Cyril that it had been fun. She thanked him, and he brushed it off before emphasizing that she was beautiful. Cyril asked Clara what she thought. Clara looked at the dragon. He explained that dragons were not meant to be chained and locked away. They looked their most beautiful when they were out in the open. Jean realized what he meant and affirmed that it was as expected of him. Clara agreed, certain that he was absolutely right. He was truly someone worthy of Jean's trust. Clara hoped they could continue their relationship for a long time. Cyril thanked her. Jean smiled. Clara said she would send over the contract money as soon as tomorrow. Cyril remembered something and realized there was something he wanted to ask first. Clara asked what it was. Cyril explained that it concerned the food for the dragons and asked whether she could introduce him to her supplier. Clara agreed and said she would tell the supplier to come visit him. Clara then called Cyril. Jean told him that he really was unusual and wondered why he would go through all that trouble. She looked at the dragon and realized that it had such a beautiful coat. Cyril explained that he wanted the others to be able to eat well too. Jean smiled, finding it so like him that he truly put the dragon first. Cyril simply wished they lived in a world where caring for dragons was normal. The next day, Rose apologized for calling Cyril so suddenly. Cyril asked what was going on that day. Rose explained that it was a minor matter, but they had received a request addressed specifically to the dragon first. Cyril was surprised and took it as quite a compliment. Rose explained that things had somehow ended up with her becoming Cyril's personal contact window, something she was rather proud of as well. Cyril asked what the request was. Rose told him to wait while she read off the list, leaving him confused. She clarified that it was a list of all the requests they had received. Cyril asked how many there were. Rose said she could tell him the numbers right away. There were 46 extermination missions and 97 collection missions. Cyril asked her to wait a second and wondered what it meant. Rose was confused because she thought he had already expected it. Cyril's guild had taken the Countess's deal away from Lindworm, and the rumor was spreading everywhere. She explained that they were considered better than Lindworm, so people assumed they must be reliable. Cyril finally realized what was happening and sighed. He apologized and explained that with so many requests, he would have to start picking and choosing. Rose agreed that it was the right move and told him there was no need to sell himself short. He could even turn them all down if he wanted, since many of them were simply attempts to make connections anyway. Cyril supposed that made sense. He simply did not want the dragons to overwork themselves. Rose remarked that it was so like him. Cyril decided that, for now, he could at least look over the content. Rose agreed, although the requests had not yet been sorted into categories. Cyril looked through the papers and found some truly pointless requests mixed in among them. He came across one that caught his attention. Rose noticed his reaction and asked what was wrong. Cyril pointed it out and she looked into it. A dragon cub had become stuck and could not get down from a cliff. It was a rescue mission for the dragon cub. Rose found it unusual, since such requests were usually about kittens rather than dragons. Cyril decided to take the request. Rose asked whether he was sure and pointed out that the reward was only $5. Cyril could not simply ignore a baby dragon in danger. Rose smiled, recognizing that as simply his personality. On a cliff, a dragon appeared. On a mountain, Louise wondered if they were around the right area, noting that it definitely looked familiar. Cyril agreed and explained that if the intel was correct, the cliff where the baby dragon was located should be near the place where they had saved the princess before. Louise was supposed to help again, so he had asked her to come since she had been there before. She figured they would get there quickly, but if the rescue proved too difficult, Cyril would go in himself. If he transformed, he should be fine no matter the situation. Louise understood and asked what kind of child it was. Cyril explained that this was actually another reason he had asked her to come. Based on the traits the requester had told them, he thought it was probably a Beowulf type. Louise urged that they hurry and save it. Later, they arrived at the cliff. Louise looked at something and identified it as the one they were looking for. The baby dragon was trembling. Cyril asked whether Louise could get up there. She explained that there was no footing and that the area was small, making it dangerous. Cyril understood and decided to go himself. Louise agreed and told him she was counting on him. Cyril transformed, flew up, and reached the baby dragon. The baby dragon was surprised. They went down again, with Cyril carrying the baby dragon. Louise was amazed and could barely see anything. She asked the baby dragon whether she was okay or hurt anywhere. The baby dragon called her big sister and wondered who she was. Louise was shocked. Cyril asked what was wrong, and she explained that the baby dragon was not a Beowulf. Cyril was confused until Louise revealed that the baby dragon was purebred. He was shocked. There was no way he had expected that. The dragons used by dragon knights were essentially farmed creatures modified by humans, while the original dragons they came from were called purebreds. Among today's dragons, they were said to be as rare as 1 in 10,000. This one was of Beowulf origin. It was Cyril's first time seeing a purebred dragon himself. He stared at the baby dragon, and the baby dragon stared back at him. Cyril wondered what was happening. The baby dragon thought Cyril was her daddy, leaving him confused. He explained that he was just a human. She wondered why he looked like a human when he had looked different earlier. Cyril remained confused until Louise explained that the baby dragon was referring to his transformed appearance. He realized it and transformed again. The baby dragon smiled and identified him as her daddy. Cyril apologized and explained that using that much energy really wore him out. The baby dragon was confused. Louise suggested that perhaps this was the baby dragon's first time seeing something like a dragon. Cyril thought it could be imprinting, with the baby dragon having seen his dragon form as her parent. Louise found it amazing that a purebred had become attached to a human, as that was extremely rare. Cyril considered them extremely lucky. Louise wondered whether the baby dragon's real parents were nearby as well. Cyril agreed that it was possible. He asked the baby dragon where she had been born, but she was clueless. He asked again when she had first realized anything. The baby dragon then led the way. Cyril noted that she was pretty fast. The baby dragon ran, and she was too fast. They chased after her, but Louise was amazed and could not keep up at all. Cyril wondered why the baby dragon was so fast. Louise explained that purebreds like her were good at short bursts of speed, unlike them. Since humans had no use for that ability, the dragons had been modified for long-distance travel instead. More importantly, they were going to lose her, so they had to go after her. Cyril told Louise to take a break. She agreed. Cyril transformed and realized that things were bad. Even in this form, he could not catch up. He would not be able to keep this up. Cyril called out to the baby dragon. She stopped and called back to him. He saw a cracked egg and asked whether she had come from the cracked egg. She explained that she could not find Cyril, so she had gone to look for him. Cyril realized that this was how she had ended up over the cliff. The baby dragon explained that it had been scary. Cyril noticed something. It was a fragment of her real parent's claw. The baby dragon looked for Louise, and Cyril explained that she had been running so fast that Louise had needed to stop and rest. The baby dragon was shocked and wondered what they should do. She apologized and ran away again. Cyril decided to go after her. He transformed and was surprised by what he saw. It was the claws. He ran and became confused about his feet. He realized that he had absorbed the purebred's claws and wondered what that meant. He tried to run, and as he had expected, he was far faster than before, more than 10 times faster than a horse. However, the energy drain was brutal. Cyril decided he was done for the day. The baby dragon called him daddy and wondered what was wrong. Cyril said nothing was wrong. Louise appeared and remarked on how fast the baby dragon was. Cyril realized that they were both getting run ragged. He then noticed that Louise was carrying a boar. She had figured that he might be tired from transforming so much. Cyril thanked Louise, saying that it really helped. They ate and Cyril thanked her for the meal. He thought that from his last transformation, he had managed to absorb the purebred's claws. Cyril told Louise to head back to Partholon. The baby dragon wondered where they were going. Cyril explained that they were heading to their base back home and asked whether she wanted to come. The baby dragon agreed. Cyril realized that he needed to give her a name. The baby dragon fell silent. He decided they would call her Leah. Leah was happy and agreed. Chris realized they were back. She saw Leah and noted that purebreds were quite rare these days. Leah greeted Chris and explained that she had come with her daddy. Chris remarked that she was an energetic one and wondered why Leah called Cyril daddy. Cyril explained that he would explain that part later. Chris then noticed that Cyril felt a little different. He asked Chris whether it was all right to lend him a bone. Chris asked whether he meant the phoenix horn. Cyril thought that he might be able to absorb the power of immortality. In their base, Cyril stood in front of Louise while the dragons watched nervously. Louise asked whether he was really sure about this, and Cyril confirmed that he was, telling her to go ahead. Louise remained hesitant, but Chris laughed and assured her there was no need to hold back. No matter what Louise tried, the current version of Cyril would only feel it as a light nibble. Louise acknowledged that Chris had a point. Cyril wondered whether that was really a good thing, and Louise agreed. She formed a fire. Suddenly, Jean appeared and wondered what they were doing. Louise and Cyril looked at her, and the fire suddenly blasted through Cyril's stomach. Jean was shocked. Cyril was hurt, then transformed. Jean asked whether he was okay, and Cyril's injury healed rapidly. Jean realized what had happened. Cyril had absorbed the phoenix horn, and they were testing the immortal dragonkin form. Jean was relieved and confirmed that he was right, as there was not even a scar left. Cyril explained that the fire had definitely gone right through his stomach, yet it had completely healed. In dragonkin form, he was basically invincible, and if he was injured in human form, he could transform and heal instantly. Jean found it amazing. Louise called out to him and wondered whether that meant he no longer needed her powers. Cyril clarified that it was not like that at all. Since he had absorbed the power of immortality, he had somewhat expected this result. However, his energy consumption was now about 10 times higher than before, making his fuel efficiency terrible. Jean found that pretty amazing as well. Cyril told Louise that for small injuries, it would be better to use her sleep to heal power. Louise was glad. Cyril considered it great to have the power to protect everyone, and Jean agreed. Jean explained that this was actually why she had come that day. She had done some reading in the castle's archive and discovered a really interesting seasoning. Cyril wondered whether she had looked into it, and Jean explained that it was called rainbow salt arc and seal. Cyril had never heard of it before. Jean explained that it was really tricky to use, so ordinary cooks did not touch it. Cyril wondered whether, if she was telling him about it, that meant it was something suited to him. Jean explained that it tasted like regular salt on its own, but when used on ingredients, the flavor of the food changed over time. Cyril was surprised. Jean explained that there was supposedly no way to predict when or how the flavor would change. If the taste changed before the food even reached the table, it would be useless, at least for most people. Cyril considered that someone like him, who was always struggling with the same old flavors, could make use of it. Jean agreed and thought it was perfect for him. Cyril thanked her and said it was great information. Jean was glad that she could be of help to him. Cyril asked where he could buy the arc and seal. Jean explained that since regular chefs did not use it, he would either have to gather it himself or request it through the guild. Cyril thought that made sense. Jean had also obtained information on where it grew, although the location was a bit far. Cyril considered that a huge help. Jean suggested that if he was not busy, he should come with her the next day. Cyril agreed. Cyril called Colette and asked whether she could bring out some fruit. Colette gave him a banana. Cyril thought that asking Colette to come along for carrying supplies would be useful, but it was especially helpful that she could bring lots of food as well. Jean was shocked. Cyril asked what was wrong. Jean explained that the banana had just touched Colette's lip. Cyril wondered what that meant, and Jean explained that it was an indirect kiss before immediately dismissing the matter. She remembered that Colette was a dragon anyway and told herself to forget she had said anything. Cyril and Colette remained confused. Jean considered the matter more important than that and praised Cyril for being amazing. He had eaten food that had come out of a Mashusu species' belly without a moment of hesitation. Cyril explained that the Mashusu stomach did not contain any gastric acid, so it was clean. Jean knew that, but most people would still be grossed out. She found it amazing that Cyril did not care at all. Cyril admitted that he kind of understood and kind of did not. Colette asked whether he wanted more fruit. Cyril noticed something and heard a sound. Jean asked what was wrong. Cyril explained that he had heard something, leaving her confused. Jean looked around and confirmed that he was right, wondering whether it was the wind. Cyril knew it was not. The sound was not natural. Cyril ran. Jean was surprised, while Colette urged him to wait for them. They ran toward the sound and found a Naga type, a dragon knight, and a golem. They looked at them. Jean recognized that the situation was bad and wondered what they should do. Cyril decided to leave it to him. Cyril transformed and ran toward the golem. He attacked it and a girl appeared. Cyril realized that he could not afford to hold back and had to take it down in one hit, though the energy drain was brutal. The girl was astonished that a human had taken down a golem in a single strike. She thanked Cyril for the assistance and introduced herself as Rosalie Lane before asking the name of her savior. Cyril introduced himself and Jean. Rosalie was surprised when she realized that he was from a dragon first. Cyril asked whether she knew them. Rosalie confirmed that she did and explained that they were the hottest guild right now. She had never imagined that she would be rescued by him and was touched by it. Cyril remained silent. Rosalie continued praising his guild, saying that it truly lived up to the hype and that even his horse was special. There were not many horses that did not fear dragons, so she assumed they must be well trained. Cyril realized, now that Rosalie had mentioned it, that the horse really was pretty amazing. It was the princess's horse, after all, so it was only natural that it would be no ordinary one. Rosalie remained amazed. Cyril found the attention starting to become a little embarrassing. More importantly, he noted that it was rare to see a real dragon knight of the classic style these days. Rosalie understood what he meant. She had become accustomed to riding her dragon, which was why she was a solo guild. The classic style referred to those who operated while riding dragons. There were few of them nowadays because the role of dragon knight guilds had diversified. Most only scouted or carried light cargo. Cyril thought that must be tough. Rosalie explained that she had taken what should have been an easy extermination job, only to happen upon a golem and get caught by it. She thanked him again. Cyril wished Rosalie good luck. Jean praised Rosalie as an impressive dragon knight, saying that the way she rode was the very image of man and dragon as one. She even considered hiring Rosalie for the palace. Cyril was not sure about that. Jean noticed his hesitation and wondered whether something was bothering him. Cyril acknowledged that Rosalie was certainly capable, but when he saw her dragon, the impression he got was that the dragon was telling Rosalie to hurry and get on its back. Jean found that creepy. Cyril explained that there were a lot of people like that. Colette immediately made it clear that she was not like that. Cyril was confused and clarified that he was not talking about Colette. He meant the wyvern he had rented before. Colette was surprised. Cyril wondered why she would assume he was talking about her. Colette insisted that it was just a misunderstanding. Cyril did not believe her. Colette became angry and insisted again that it was a misunderstanding. Cyril smiled, understanding. Later on, they could finally see it. Cyril was amazed when they arrived at the Ark and Seal gathering site, the Lake Garrett. Lake Garrett was a rainbow-colored crystal on a rainbow-colored lake surface. Cyril found it incredible, while Jean found it breathtaking. They looked at the crystals before Cyril wondered whether they were crystals Ark and Seal. Jean confirmed that they were, explaining that the minerals in the lake had slowly crystallized due to changes in the water level. Colette decided to go collect some. Cyril asked whether she needed help, but she explained that she mined regularly and had no trouble doing it. Cyril agreed and left it to Colette. He then invited Jean to go hunting and test the flavor, and she agreed. Jean pointed at something that had moved and noticed a wild boar. Cyril decided that it would do nicely. The boar noticed them, and Cyril made sure it would not get away. He used fire to get the boar, but it attacked them. Jean called out to Cyril, and he killed the boar with his bare hands. He then began cleaning and preparing it. Jean was amazed, and Cyril noticed her sudden reaction. She found it incredible that he had become stronger even without transforming. Cyril was confused at first, but after considering it, he acknowledged that taking down a boar barehanded was indeed pretty impressive. Jean then asked about the Ark and Seal. Cyril found it delicious, and Jean confirmed his assessment. Cyril noted that every bite changed, becoming sweeter and spicier, and found it amazing. He felt as though he could eat twice as much now. He thanked Colette for collecting so much, and Colette accepted the thanks naturally. Now that Cyril thought about it, there was no doubt that his base physical ability had improved. Colette wondered how much it had increased, and Cyril explained that it was just enough to remain within human limit. It was more of a bonus than anything, but gaining a power-up without energy drain was still a major advantage. Colette pointed out that Cyril could not simply keep boosting his dragonkin form. Cyril acknowledged that this was the problem and that apparently he could not. Colette wondered why, so Cyril explained that after testing the immortality power, he had also obtained some skin and claws from Louise and the others, but he could not absorb those. Colette was confused. Cyril considered the possibility that the Beowulf Origins claw had come from a corpse. The phoenix horn had come from Chris's immortal body, so he suspected that the ability might be tied to life, the soul, or something similar. Colette would not work either. Jean raised her hand and admitted that she had not caught all of Colette's explanation. She wondered whether it was acceptable for the dragon relics to come from dead dragons. Cyril considered that merely his guess, but thought it was probably possible. Jean decided to provide a few, explaining that they had plenty of them. Cyril remembered that Jean was a princess, and she confirmed it, revealing that the relics were kept in the treasury. Jean handed Cyril a necklace. He wondered whether it was a gem, but Jean explained that it was a Mizuchi T-scale. Cyril had never heard of Mizuchi type, which was incredibly rare and sometimes classified as a kind of phantom dragon. Jean explained that when the scales were worn, they manifested a protective barrier. They had even used them on their carriages before. Cyril remembered his first meeting with Princess Jean, when a landslide had wiped out her guards and wrecked the carriage, yet the princess inside had remained completely unharmed. Jean explained that the same scale was now a pendant she wore and that Cyril should use it. Cyril refused because it was supposed to protect her, but Jean reassured him that she was perfectly safe now because she was with his side. Cyril agreed to accept it. He resolved that if anything happened, he would protect her without fail. As Cyril held the pendant, it suddenly glowed. Colette noticed and wondered what was wrong, but Cyril remained silent. Jean also wondered what was happening. Cyril realized that the smell of grilled meat had disappeared, and Jean noticed the same thing. Cyril transformed, and the ground suddenly cracked. He returned to human form and assured them that he was fine, explaining that he was simply out of energy because the consumption rate had really increased. Colette wondered what had just happened. Cyril explained that it was the power of the Mizuchi scale, a barrier that surrounded the area. Jean recognized it as a definite protective force. Cyril realized that when the scent had been blocked earlier, the barrier must have activated slightly even while he was in human form. If he could fully control it, he might be able to protect everyone from anything. Later, back at their base, Colette wondered whether the stones were suitable for making something in human form. Cyril found them perfect for making it. Colette explained that it was easy and swallowed some dirt before squeezing it in her stomach to shape it into a solid. Cyril realized that it was like clay and had no idea Colette possessed a skill like that. Colette was happy with the result and regarded the ability as nothing special for her. Louise called out to Cyril and asked what he intended to do with that. Cyril explained that he had been able to eat a lot that day thanks to the Arc-End seal, so he wanted to run a little test. He called everyone over and told them to stand back. Colette and Jean agreed. Leah wondered what he was going to do, but Cyril told her it was dangerous and asked her to wait over there. Leah agreed and ran toward Colette and Jean. Colette remained silent, and Cyril noticed something was wrong. Chris laughed and suggested that perhaps if she acted a little spoiled, Cyril would have patted her. Colette was shocked and suddenly bit Chris. Cyril apologized and told them to save the playtime for later. Chris accepted it without issue. Cyril then told Chris that he was counting on her, and Chris understood. Chris breathed fire while Cyril stood in front of the stones. He transformed, and a barrier appeared. Everyone was surprised. Cyril transformed back into human form and confirmed that the test was a success. Since the barrier had withstood Chris's flames, its strength was legitimate. Jean realized that this had been the purpose of the test and was surprised once again that day. Cyril thanked Chris, who considered him truly the strongest man alive. Cyril also thanked Colette for making the dirt doll. Colette pointed out that it did not necessarily have to be a doll, but Cyril could not exactly risk testing it on a real friend, even though they were willing to risk themselves. Jean realized that Cyril himself was willing to risk himself. Cyril sighed and explained that even with the most energy he had ever stored, he could not hold the form for longer than 3 seconds. If he wanted to be useful in battle, he would need at least 30 seconds. Chris considered the problem. She pointed out the energy storage and massive intake before identifying a solution and noting that it was not as though there were none. Cyril was surprised, and Chris offered to explain it. Cyril agreed. The dragons were waiting. Chris's first option was for Cyril to eat a dragon. Cyril was shocked that he would have to eat a dragon. Chris explained that if he devoured a dragon, soul and all, he would gain power efficiently. Cyril called out to Chris and warned her that he would get mad. Chris laughed and revealed that she was kidding. Cyril accepted that, and Chris explained that it had been a joke, but she could now see that Cyril truly cared about dragons. Cyril thought that hearing such talk would obviously piss him off. Chris clarified that this was not the point, but Cyril had become so angry that he missed what she had actually said. Chris asked him what exactly she had said, and he realized that it was option 1. Cyril also realized that there were other suggestions. Colette shouted at Chris not to set traps like that. Chris laughed and assured them that she meant no harm. Cyril sighed and asked what she had actually wanted to tell him. Chris finally explained that he should use a dragon orb and that it would solve everything. Cyril asked what a dragon orb was. Louise apologized and admitted that she did not know, while Emma said it was the first time she had heard of it and wondered what it was supposed to be. Chris considered it better to experience rather than explain and decided that trying it out would be best. Cyril remained confused, but Chris confirmed that the dragon orb could actually be created right there. Cyril found that helpful and thought that if it was easy to obtain, it would be great. Chris pointed out that the problem was who would make it. Other than Colette, she suggested herself, then apologized to Colette and explained that it was not something she was suited for. Colette wondered why, and Chris asked which of them was the lightest eater among all the dragons. Emma also wondered who the light eater was. Colette asked whether being a light eater was necessary, and Chris explained that, at least for now, they should have Colette sit this one out. Colette sulked. Cyril thought that Mashusu types ate more than most mid-sized dragons. He considered that perhaps Leah could do it, but Leah wondered whether he had called her. Since Leah was still small, Cyril reconsidered and thought they should let her sit this one out. He assured her that he was fine with that and realized that someone would have to eat something. Chris agreed. Cyril thought that Louise could probably eat the most at that point. Chris agreed, noting that unlike the others, Louise was herbivorous. Emma also agreed and felt that she did not seem capable of being much help. Cyril explained that Emma burned a lot of energy after all. He then asked Louise whether he could count on her, and she agreed to handle it. Chris instructed Louise to eat until she was full. Jean called Louise and wondered whether, since she was eating a lot, she would like some arc-end seal as well. Cyril refused the idea, explaining that seasonings made for humans were not good for dragons. Colette pointed out that she could swallow things whole just fine. Emma could eat it as well, but it made her mouth feel all tingly. Cyril realized that it was definitely not good. Jean understood, and Cyril explained that even if Jean meant well by adding seasoning, it was not good to feed dragons the same things humans ate. Jean understood and found the information helpful. Cyril explained to Emma that meat was better raw than cooked. Emma agreed, finding it much better raw. Jean and Cyril smiled, and Jean remarked that Cyril was really different from humans. Later, Louise was full. Cyril praised her for doing a good job, and Chris agreed. From then on, Chris would teach Louise the dragon orb technique. Chris built a small fire and instructed Louise to accept it. Louise was surprised as both of them had a small fire in their heads. The small fire was suddenly absorbed, leaving Louise confused. Chris asked whether she understood, and Louise confirmed that she did. Louise looked at Cyril and decided to try making a dragon orb, asking whether it was acceptable. Cyril agreed. Louise closed her eyes and tried to make a dragon orb. A small orb appeared and Louise confirmed that it was finished. Chris praised her and identified it as the dragon orb. Cyril thought it resembled a perfectly clear pearl and wondered what he was supposed to do with it. Chris instructed him to eat it. Although he could chew it, swallowing it whole the first time would be easier on his body. Cyril understood and swallowed the orb. Chris wondered whether it was starting. Cyril felt something in his stomach, and Jean became worried. Cyril described the sensation as being like dried seaweed suddenly rehydrating in his stomach. Chris laughed and explained that if he had chewed it, it would have expanded even faster. Cyril thought that sounded painful and decided he would try chewing one once he became accustomed to it. Cyril wondered whether the orb was pure energy itself. Chris confirmed that it was. A dragon orb was concentrated dragon energy, and dragons converted energy very efficiently, so Cyril must have absorbed a great deal of it. Cyril recognized that, for a human, it was a massive amount. He realized that whenever he ran out of energy, everyone could eat in his place and he could recharge with a dragon orb. He wondered whether that was possible, and Chris confirmed that it was. The more mouths he had, the more efficient it became. Cyril found the idea remarkable. Louise worried that she could only make one dragon orb at a time. Since Cyril could not stockpile them, she did not think his energy would increase by that much. Cyril accepted that it could not be helped, but even so, he considered it a huge help. Chris laughed and explained that this was not even a problem. More dragons would gather around him, which meant more dragon orbs. Louise understood and realized that might indeed be true. Cyril regarded Chris as reckless and wondered how much energy he had now. He transformed while everyone stared at him. He then transformed back and realized that his limit had increased to 5 seconds. One dragon orb gave him 5 seconds of power. It seemed short, but it was far more than before and opened up a great many possibilities. Cyril thanked Chris. Chris expected Cyril to continue showing her interesting things from then on as well. In southwest Boruzel-Marzensky Valley, Cyril appeared and transformed into dragon form. He attacked wolves, targeting a herd of over 100 Tonibin wolves. He cut off their heads and realized that the 10-second transformation limit had been reached. Louise appeared and gave him a dragon orb. Cyril transformed back and recognized that Louise had saved him. A pack of Tonibin wolves was as dangerous as a top-tier mercenary squad, according to Jean when she had given him the job. Cyril ran out of energy again as more wolves approached. He recognized it as an ambush and thought that they were remarkably clever. He killed the wolves and transformed back into human form. Emma asked whether he was okay. Cyril replied that it was a good thing they had been on guard. He transformed again and prepared to finish the hunt. In the Boruzel administration office, Cyril called Colette and she understood. Rose appeared, with wolves in front of her, and confirmed that everything was in order. She confirmed the Tonibin wolf extermination and praised Cyril for doing a good job. Cyril called Colette and asked her to go ahead and finish up. Colette wondered about the rest, and Cyril thought that she could eat them. He asked whether she could digest them, and she assured him that she could do so easily. Rose told Cyril to wait. He wondered what it was, and she instructed him to keep the evidence for now. A message from Jean had arrived, leaving Cyril wondering what it could be. The extermination mission had been a job the princess had asked him to undertake through the office. She could have told him directly, but she had a reason to go through formal channels. Jean asked whether he could bring the wolf heads to the warehouse. Cyril wondered what they were going to do with them, and Jean explained that the government was going to examine them. Cyril wondered why the government would examine them. Jean asked whether he knew how dragon knights had titles. Cyril had heard of them and knew that the title was awarded to individuals rather than guild. He had regarded it as merely an honorary distinction and had never paid much attention to it. Jean confirmed that this was true most of the time. However, the title Cyril was about to receive would not merely be an honorary one. Cyril was confused. Jean explained that if the extermination was examined and officially confirmed, the title of Dragon Knight, a one-star Dragon Knight, would be granted to him. Cyril was shocked.